Chapter 909. Why are you looking for me? Guhan asked, puzzled. You are not the most powerful person in the Guanghui amusement park. I walked around this morning, and I saw at least 2 people stronger than you. Why didn't you ask them to come with you? You just walked around, and you found those 2 people? Kwong 3 looked a little horrified. Both of them are very low-key people. I'm afraid that even the other people in the amusement park don't know how terrifying their strength is. How did you see through their strength? We, the sword-bearers, have been fighting with Yuan Ku for 1,000 years. If we didn't even have a way to see through Yuan Ku's strength, we wouldn't have been able to survive for so long, Guhan said indifferently. Cut the crap. Tell me why you didn't look for them. Obviously, they are more trustworthy. After all, you are the same kind. It is because we are the same kind that I can't look for them, Kwong 3 said in a deep voice. Yuan Ku's strength alone can't kill that evil existence. Only the power of the sword-bearers can truly destroy it. If you hadn't come to the Guanghui amusement park, I'm afraid I would have to go out and find a sword-bearer to help me in a few days. Kwong 3 gritted her teeth. Obviously, her resentment toward this evil existence had reached its limit. Then you should be glad that I came, Guhan shrugged. Otherwise, I can guarantee that if you dare to approach any human sword-bearer, they will attack you without hesitation. If it were me 3 months ago, I would have attacked you without hesitation. I wouldn't have given you a chance to talk to me. Then, should I cry tears of gratitude? Kwong 3 suddenly showed a flower-like smile. Coupled with the tear stains on her face, she looked extraordinarily strange. Or, you want me to offer this useless body? Crazy 3 pulled up his gothic pleated skirt, and a black forest flashed past. Crazy 3 was actually wearing nothing underneath. You have to tell me everything you know. You can't hide anything. I can't follow you into such a dangerous place without knowing anything, Guhan said gravely. Of course. What do you want to know? I'll answer all of your questions. Kwong 3 smiled and put down his skirt. Who is that evil existence? Why did he release his demonic energy to deal with 1,000 Do 50 bells and your king? Guhan asked. His name is Gilgamesh. I don't know if you've heard of him. Kwong 3 finally said the name of the evil existence. Gilgamesh, so he's here. Guhan had a look of sudden realization. Of course he knew of Yuan Ku, who had left a crucial mark in the history of humanity after the apocalypse. This Yuan Yang had been active during the early stages of the Great Calamity. He had even clashed with the Sword Ancestor, forcing the Sword Ancestor to the brink of death. If the Swordmaster had not comprehended the 1,000 sword skill to the level of the 10,000 sword skill at the critical moment and repelled Gilgamesh with a dying blow, the history of mankind might have ended at that moment. Although Gilgamesh was repelled by the Sword Ancestor, he was still one of the few leaders among the Yuan bandits at that time. He also became one of the founders of the largest Yuan dynasty faction, the Palace of Martyrs. He led the first generation of 10 kings of the Palace of Martyrs on the battlefield and finally established the Palace of Martyrs, a Yuan dynasty faction that had existed for more than 1,000 years. It was worth mentioning that King Arthur Artoria was not among the 10 kings of the Palace of Martyrs in the early days. Gilgamesh was active until the time of Zhetian Zhendi. After Zhetian Zhendi ascended, he also appeared in the eyes of humans a few times. However, all news of Gilgamesh disappeared in an instant. After 100 years of concealment, the Palace of Heroes simply removed Gilgamesh's name from the list of 10 kings and replaced it with King Arthur Artoria's name. Gilgamesh was a very active Yuan Ku among the Yuan Ku. Humans had plenty of data on Gilgamesh. This data clearly showed that Gilgamesh was definitely at the peak of the universe rank Yuan Ku. Some scholars even suggested that Gilgamesh had reached the flood rank in some aspects and should be treated as half a flood rank Yuan Ku. After all, he was the powerful Yuan Ku who once beat up Kunzu, who had just become an immortal sword rank sword wielder. He forced Kunzu to stimulate his potential and break through his limits to create the predecessor of the Billion Swords art, the Myriad Swords art. I won't do it. Guhan didn't care about his face at all and directly stated his decision. What a joke. No matter how confident Guhan was in his strength, he wasn't confident enough to think that he could defeat Gilgamesh, who was equivalent to half a flood rank Yuan Ku. Even if Guhan became a spirit sword rank sword wielder, Guhan wouldn't have the guts to do so, not to mention that Guhan was only a famed sword rank sword wielder now. Are you afraid? Are you still a man? Kwong 3 was a little anxious when he heard this and began to use a lame method of provocation. Whether I'm a man or not doesn't depend on what you say. Guhan waved his hand. I won't admit that I'm afraid. As a famed sword rank sword wielder, it's natural for me to be afraid of half a flood rank Yuan Ku. What about your wife? Aren't you going to save your wife? Kwong 3 quickly pulled Chidu Isuzu out. Tell me the truth. I'm a human, and she's Yuan Ku. Because of some mistakes, Black Tortoise was born. I don't mind making this mistake go back to square one. Guhan's tone was as cold as a block of ice. There's really no good man. Kwong 3's tone became more and more contemptuous. I've long guessed that you humans are bastards who only know how to protect yourselves. But please use your brain and think about it. If Gilgamesh still had his full strength, it would be enough for him to jump out and destroy our Radiance amusement park. Why would he secretly use such a dirty trick like evil energy? According to my calculations, he will break out of the seal in about half a year's time. If we don't take this opportunity to kill him, he will break out of the seal sooner or later. When that time comes, even you human swordbearers will have a headache. His hatred for you humans has grown deeper and deeper over the centuries. Once he returns to Shanhai Pass, I'm afraid that your heavenly cycle star formation will shatter in an instant, and the 12 ancestors of sorcery will break out of the seal. Then, the end of the human race will really come. That's right, Gilgamesh has been sealed away for a long time, but as time passes, the seal has become weaker and weaker. In fact, there was no need for Kwong 3 to say more. Guhan had more or less guessed that Gilgamesh was in a state of being sealed. Otherwise, why would he disappear for more than 700 years? If possible, Ji Han really did not want to fight with Gilgamesh now. No matter what, he had to give himself another 10 or so years. It would not be too late to make a move after he became an immortal sword-tier sword wielder. But now, according to Kwong 3, Gilgamesh would break out of the seal in only half a year. Moreover, he was in a completely closed environment like Shanhai Pass, where sword essence could not be replenished. In this half a year, Guhan had no other way to increase his strength except by taking the sword essence oral solution to increase his sword essence. Therefore, half a year did not mean much to Guhan. It was better to take advantage of the fact that the seal was a little stronger and kill Gilgamesh on the spot. Just as Kwong 3 had said, Ji Han could not accept Gilgamesh breaking the seal. The reason was very simple, because once Gilgamesh broke the seal, no one in the entire Shanhai Pass would be able to resist his swordbearer. The heavenly cycle star formation might not even last for an hour. Just thinking about it was like the end of the world. Where is he sealed now? When Guhan asked this question, Guhan already knew what he should do. It's right under this forest. Kwong 3 stomped on the ground. In fact, I suspect that the entire Radiance amusement park exists to suppress Gilgamesh. Otherwise, Gilgamesh would not be suppressed under this forest. You don't know the origin of this amusement park? Weren't you in this amusement park from the beginning? Guhan asked curiously. No. In the entire amusement park, only your wife and the maid sisters are the real founders. The rest of the people, including me, came to this amusement park later. At that time, we naively thought that this amusement park was a paradise for us, the Yuan Ku who did not want to fight anymore. I didn't expect it to be a huge pit with such a terrifying existence sealed underground. When Kwong 3 said this, there was a hateful expression on her face. It seemed that she hated the Radiance amusement park as well. This gave Guhan a very uneasy feeling. He was afraid that Kwong 3 had other plans. She might even want to trap the entire Radiance amusement park. What's going on with these humans? Why are they here? Why do they look like walking corpses? Secretly raising his guard against Kwong 3, Guhan asked another question that he was very concerned about. When I came here, there were less than 1,000 of them. At that time, they were not like this. They had completely lost their intelligence. At that time, they were still normal people. Kwong 3 recalled, But as time went by, these humans multiplied more and more. Although the number of people increased, the land gradually became insufficient to grow enough crops for these humans to survive. Some humans somehow discovered and absorbed the powder in the air to resist hunger, but the more powder they inhaled, the dumber they became. Later, there was a disaster in the amusement park. The entire land of the amusement park became no longer suitable for growing crops. These humans had no choice but to rely on the powder in the air to survive. As a result, all of them became what they are now. I will say one more thing. Your wife seems to have known that this would happen. Therefore, all the attractions in Radiant's amusement park can alleviate the side effects of the powder. Otherwise, if they stay in the state of walking corpses for a long time, all of these humans will eventually turn into real zombies, and they will all die. Chapter 9-10. Crazy Three's words unraveled many of the doubts in Guhan's mind. At the very least, he had completely figured out why these humans had turned into walking corpses. Just as Guhan had guessed during the meal, it was caused by the mysterious powder in the air. The origins of most of the Yuan Ku in the amusement park were also clear. Before the establishment of the free cities, many Yuan Ku were tired of the endless war with humans. After hearing about the existence of Yuan Ku's paradise, they took the initiative to come to the northeast. However, because Radiant's amusement park did not desperately promote itself like the free cities, it rarely took the initiative to reveal its location. Therefore, not many Yuan Ku knew about it. In the past few centuries, only a few hundred Yuan Ku had arrived here. Later on, when the free cities were established, those Yuan Ku who pursued freedom joined the camp of the free cities. The former free city, Radiant's amusement park, was completely forgotten by most of the Yuan Ku. Humans never knew of the existence of such an amusement park. As for the origins of the first 1,000 or so humans in the amusement park, it was unclear. Perhaps nearby survivors had discovered this place and taken the initiative to enter the dimensional rift to survive and reproduce. Why they appeared here was not important. What was important was that there were now 300,000 people here. They were all human compatriots, and Guhan had the obligation to ensure their lives and remove the restrictions on the powder. In fact, the way to return to normal was very simple. They just needed to ensure that they had enough food. As long as there was enough food for them, there was no need for them to absorb the powder in the air. After the amusement park's continuous purification, they would soon become normal humans again. However, it was easier said than done to find food to feed 300,000 people. Unless Guhan could get help from Shanghai Pass, he would not be able to have a continuous supply of food. But in this way, Radiant's amusement park was bound to be exposed to humans. Radiant's amusement park was not like the free cities, which had the suppression of the desolate level Yuan Ku. Guhan did not doubt the nature of humans. They would not choose to live in harmony with this Yuan Ku force. Instead, they would choose to directly destroy this Yuan Ku force without anyone knowing. But in this way, Jiu Xianwu, who grew up here, was bound to have a deep-seated hatred for humans. What would happen to Guhan's father's position? Of course, the trickiest problem was Gilgamesh. Guhan really did not want to make a move against such an unknown and powerful existence. Therefore, Guhan was still hesitating. If Gilgamesh's seal could still exist for half a year, it would actually be an excellent buffer time for Guhan. At least, Guhan could have a full 60,000 sword elements in his body, and the total number of sword elements would reach 100,000 quarks. In terms of quantity, it would reach the lowest strength of a spirit sword wielder. In this way, the odds of winning the battle would undoubtedly improve a lot. In fact, Kwong 3 did not force Guhan to kill Gilgamesh now. As long as it was before Gilgamesh broke the seal, it would be fine. However, 1,000 Do 50 bells could only live for one day. If Guhan did not make a move with Kwong 3 tonight, Jiu Xianwu would lose her adoptive mother forever. Finally, when Kwong 3 saw that Guhan could not give her an accurate answer, she gave Guhan a small headset, which could only be used in Radiant's amusement park. Through this headset, Guhan could talk to Kwong 3 at any time and tell her his decision. This made Guhan fall into a deep hesitation. Even after returning to his room, Guhan was still hesitating. Guhan really hoped that he could go back to his past self 3 months ago, so that he would not worry about this ridiculous problem at all. He would directly return to Shanghai Pass to recuperate for half a year and fight Gilgamesh in his strongest state. But now, Guhan was bound by Jiyu Shenwu and could not make the answer he wanted. Dad, do you want to see Mom? I think if you are willing to stay by Mom's side, Mom may be able to. The haggard Jiyu Shenwu broke into Guhan's room. Although she did not finish her words, Guhan already understood what she meant. Jiyu Shenwu hoped that Guhan could accompany Thousand Do 50 Bells, hoping to use the power of love to wake up Thousand Do 50 Bells. It had to be said that this was a very nonsensical thing. Not to mention whether there was love between Guhan and Thousand Do 50 Bells. When Thousand Do 50 Bells fell into a deep coma, even if there was a strong love, it would not be able to reach Thousand Do 50 Bells' heart. The so-called recovery of the vegetative state was just a trick to deceive children. But looking at Jiyu Shenwu's extremely expectant eyes, Guhan hesitated for a while and finally got up and entered Thousand Do 50 Bells' room with Jiyu Shenwu, silently sitting beside her to accompany her. But at the same time, Guhan made another decision in his heart. Miss Kwong 3. I think it's better to do it after half a year. Guhan took advantage of Jiyu Shenwu's absence and said to Kwong 3. You really made such a decision, heartless man. Kwong 3 disdainfully ridiculed Guhan and took the initiative to hang up the communication with Guhan. Jiyu Shenwu did not know that he had actually harmed his mother. If Jiyu Shenwu did not let Guhan accompany Thousand Do 50 Bells, then Guhan would still be entangled in his own hesitation. Maybe he would have made the decision to go fight Gilgamesh tonight. But Jiyu Shenwu forcibly dragged Guhan to accompany Thousand Do 50 Bells, so Guhan formed a self-thought deal in his heart. I will accompany you here for one night, and I can redeem my sin of saving your life. Of course, this was a very nonsensical self-righteous deal to comfort himself. But in fact, this became the last straw that broke the balance in Guhan's heart. Time passed minute by minute, and finally, until dawn the next day, a miracle did not happen. Thousand Do 50 Bells not only did not wake up, but her vital signs were getting weaker and weaker. Jiyu Shenwu went crazy and called Dr. Roman over. After the final examination, Dr. Roman could only helplessly shake his head. The grief-stricken Jiyu Shenwu hugged Thousand Do 50 Bells' body and cried endlessly. In the midst of Jiyu Shenwu's pain, Thousand Do 50 Bells breathed her last breath and completely lost all signs of life, becoming a stiff corpse. Just as Dr. Roman had predicted, after Chioki Isuzu died, her corpse turned into a puppet that was being controlled, revealing a devilish expression. Grabbing the arm of Jiyu Shenwu that was leaning against her, she was ready to bite down. Not good. Don't let her bite people. Learning is spread in this way. Whoever is bitten by her will be the next person to be invaded by evil energy, Dr. Roman hurriedly said. But by the time he said this, it was already too late. The teeth of the puppet Thousand Do 50 Bells were less than a mouth away from Jiyu Shenwu's arm. The heartbroken Jiyu Shenwu's body was already extremely weak, and simply did not have the strength to resist the strength of the puppet Thousand Do 50 Bells. Jiyu Shenwu was about to be bitten. Poochie. At the last moment, Thousand Do 50 Bells' head was like a radish that was plucked off, making a poochie sound as it rolled onto the bed. The wound on her head did not even have a drop of blood, but instead emitted a thick black smoke. It seemed like Thousand Do 50 Bells' blood had long been assimilated by the evil energy. The one who made the move was none other than Guhan, who had sharp eyes and quick hands. In fact, he had long been on guard against Chen Do Isuzu's changes. When Jiyu Han saw Chen Do Isuzu's strange face, his hand had already moved, and without hesitation, he cut off her head. Mom! Guhan naturally had good intentions in order to save his daughter, but to Jiyu Shenwu, there was nothing more painful than seeing his mother's head being chopped off by someone else. Furthermore, the one who chopped off his mother's head was his own father. Unable to accept all of this, Jiyu Shenwu cried out twice and fainted with his eyes closed. Guhan carried Jiyu Shenwu into his embrace. At the same time, under Dr. Roman's command, the others tied Thousand Do 50 Bells, who had lost her head but was still struggling to get up and attack others, onto the bed. What do you think we should do now? The rest of the Yuan Ku asked Dr. Roman in a panic. They did not want to become a puppet like 1050 bells. Burning her is the best method. Only by burning her body to ashes can her soul be completely freed, and we can also have the final safety. Dr. Roman gave the answer to the question. Burn. Then burn her. The rest of the Yuan Kus quickly formed a united front. Although they were all indebted to 1050 bells, and were usually very respectful to her, 1050 bells was already a dead person. However, Chidu Isuzu was already a dead person. Rather than letting her corpse struggle here, it was too dangerous. It was better to cremate her. Anyway, she would have to be cremated sooner or later. Wait. Just as the others were preparing to carry 1050 bells' bed to be cremated, Guhan spoke up to stop them. Let this body struggle a little longer. I believe Black Tortoise must really want to see her mother for the last time. But this is too dangerous. One of the Yuan Kus said. I will stay here to watch over her. If she struggles out of the bed, I promise I will chop her into minced meat. Do you think that's all right? Since Guhan had already said so, and with his identity as 1050 Bell's husband, the other Yuan Kus naturally couldn't say anything else. Hence, they all ran out of the room, secretly deciding to hide far away from this room until 1050 Bells was cremated. I hope you don't hate me, Guhan touched Jiu Xianwu's cheek and said. Chapter 9:11. Things always go contrary to one's wishes. After Jiu Xuanwu woke up, he was scared like a rabbit and escaped from Guhan's embrace. Then he threw himself to the side of the struggling puppet mother, trying to find the last trace of warmth from Thousand Do Isuzu's body. Helpless, Guhan could only forcefully pull Jiu Xuanwu away, using his own strength to restrict Jiu Xuanwu and Thousand Do Isuzu's body to maintain a certain distance, looking at her from afar. Why? Why are you so heartless? Jiu Xuanwu, who was on the verge of collapse, roared. She is your woman. She is my mother, and you just chopped off her head like that. Are you still human? When I chopped off her head, she was already dead, and if I didn't chop off her head, you would have followed your mother's old path, and become like her. Guhan tried his best to explain. In fact, he was not very good at this kind of explanation. What's the big deal? This way I can be with my mother forever. Why did you stop my mother from taking me away? Jiu Xuanwu cried crazily. If you and your mother leave, then what about me? Don't you want your father anymore? This sounded very familiar. It was a common line from a 9 o'clock primetime family ethics drama. But at this time, Guhan realized that this was the only thing a father could say. What father? What do I want a father for? Jiu Xuanwu suddenly laughed. It was the kind of laughter that carried a heart-wrenching pain. I have never had a father since I was young. I am already used to not having a father. To me, a father is a superfluous existence, an unnecessary existence. Do you understand what I am saying? Did you think that because I took the initiative to escape to find you, I really miss you? Jiu Xuanwu became crazier and more painful as he spoke. That's where you're gravely mistaken. You're deluding yourself. I have never missed you. I have never needed you. I am only looking for you for my mother, even if it is just to make her smile. I can just go to the side of the street and pull anyone to be my father. I do not need you, I only want my mother. Faced with this situation, even though Guhan had thousands of explanations in his heart, he couldn't say a single word in the end. In fact, Guhan had a chance to save 9,050 bells. As long as Guhan and Kwong 3 worked together to kill Gilgamesh last night, then 9,050 bells would be able to survive. It was Guhan who decided to sit back and watch Chen Do Isuzu die for a higher chance of success, or rather, for his own life. Therefore, if Guhan were to explain himself at this time, Guhan would definitely not be able to say anything. He could only forcefully hold the Jiu Xuanwu in his arms and let her curse him crazily. As long as she did not try to approach the 1050 bells, it was enough. Time passed in this stalemate. After an unknown amount of time, Guhan suddenly heard an extremely urgent voice. Quick! Come here quickly. It's almost too late. This was Kwong San's voice. Listening to her panting voice, it was as if something extremely terrifying had happened to her. What's wrong? What happened? Guhan asked unhurriedly. Idiot. You're an idiot. I'm also an idiot. Kwang San's voice became more and more urgent. Gilgamesh is about to break through the seal. If you don't show up soon, it will all be over in less than 5 hours. What did you say? Guhan hurriedly stood up. Didn't you tell me that he still has half a year? Originally, there was still half a year, but after this morning, we only have 5 hours left. As for the reason, don't you always boast about your intelligence? Even if I don't say it, you can guess it. Even though Kwang San was panting, she did not forget to add a sneer. After being awakened by Kwang San, Guhan also immediately guessed something that Guhan had never thought about. That was why Gilgamesh constantly used his evil energy to corrupt Yuan Ku. After becoming a puppet, Yuan Ku had almost completely lost his strength when he was alive, and was almost the same as the simplest skeleton monster. This trick had no other use except for assassination. The speed of corruption was not fast, it was completed over a long period of time, so it was impossible to quickly form a zombie tide. So why did Gilgamesh spare no effort to use his own blood to corrupt others? No matter what the specific reason was, there was only one fundamental reason, that was, doing so could accelerate Gilgamesh's power, and help him to break free from the wind and rain as soon as possible. This was the only reason why Gilgamesh was willing to work so hard to accomplish such a tiring task. When he cut off Chen Do Isuzu's head in the morning, Guhan had already noticed that the black gas that came out of the neck did not attack others, but directly flew out of the window and floated in the direction of the forest. At first, Guhan did not think anything of it, it seemed natural for the gas to leave through the window. Now that he thought about it, the black gas was probably what Gilgamesh really needed. The black gas must have finally returned to Gilgamesh's body. This black gas that had absorbed all the power of Chen Do Isuzu's body must have greatly increased Gilgamesh's power and accelerated the process of him breaking the seal. This was why Guhan clearly had half a year, but in the blink of an eye, there were only 4 hours left. I'm such a fool. For the first time, Guhan felt that he was extremely stupid, he actually did not see through such a simple trick of Gilgamesh. In this way, in order to prevent the Ju Tien Star battle formation from being destroyed by Gilgamesh, Guhan must kill him before Gilgamesh broke the seal. In other words, Guhan must kill him immediately. What was the difference between this and last night's action? If Guhan and Kwang 3 had joined forces last night, Chen Do Isuzu might not have died, and Jiyu Xianwu would not hate him so much. Everything was caused by his own smart and self-righteous decisiveness. If Guhan had followed his conscience a little, then things would have been completely different. At this point, it was meaningless to say anything more. Guhan must immediately go and fight with Kwang 3, and then join forces to kill Gilgamesh. Guhan had no other choice. Kwang 3, I ask you, where is Ashima locked up? Guhan suddenly asked Kwang 3. Things are urgent to this extent, and you still have the mood to care about your other woman's affairs. Kwang 3 thought that Guhan wanted to let Ashima escape before the battle, so he angrily accused him. Are you going to tell me or not? If not, I will leave here right now, and no longer care about the life and death of Guang Amusement Park. Guhan said decisively. Although Kwang 3 was unhappy, he could only tell Guhan where Ashima was imprisoned. Guhan first knocked out Jiyu Xianwu, who had already lost his mind, and then walked to the constantly struggling corpse of Chen Do Isuzu. He directly put her corpse into his dimensional pocket, completely eliminating the danger of his own corpse. Then, Guhan immediately returned to his room and put all the sword maidens into his sword. He told the little lowly not to leave the room. He went all the way down to the basement of the Red Maple Kingdom's castle, and found Ashima in the dungeon. What happened? Is that bitch trying to kill me? Ashima saw Guhan and said while gritting her teeth. If it wasn't for the fact that Ashima's teeth were constantly trembling, Guhan would really think that this woman was a woman who was not afraid of anything. If the bitch you are talking about is the one you stabbed, then congratulations, she is already dead. Guhan said coldly. Really? Then even if I die, I can still smile in the underworld. Ashima's mouth was still firm, but her gums were trembling even more violently. I don't have time to watch your fearless tricks. I will let you out right now. Guhan took out his sword, and neatly cut off the iron chains that bound Ashima's hands, and released her. Thank you for saving my life. I promise I will repay you well in the future. Ashima bowed to Guhan, and was ready to escape from here. I did not save you for nothing. Guhan grabbed onto Ashima, and quickly told her, Gilgamesh is being suppressed in this place, and is about to break the seal soon. I can only buy him a little time. Once he breaks the seal, the entire Ju Tian star battle formation will be finished. After you escape from here, immediately break through the barrier of the Ju Tian star battle formation, and use your personal terminal to contact Liunian Ling. Tell her the location of the entrance, and ask her to do her best to get here and enter Guang Amusement Park. I am afraid I can't deal with Gilgamesh on my own, and only with the help of Liunian Ling will I have the final chance of winning. Before that, I will do my best to delay him. Wait a minute. Can you slow down a bit? I am stupid. I can't react fast enough. Ashima felt like she was about to faint. Then listen, you only have one task. After you get out, immediately contact Liunian Ling through your personal terminal and ask her to come here. As for the reason, tell her that if she doesn't come, Guhan will die, and there is no reason for him to live. All right. I understand now. Ashima nodded. But are you sure Liunian Ling will come here just because of this? She will. Guhan nodded. Because if it was Liunian Ling who told me this, I would also go to her at all costs. Disgusting. Ashima spat, and immediately rushed out of the dungeon. After all, the entire Guang amusement park was in chaos, and no one cared about her escape. I have already prepared a backup plan. Let's see how powerful Gilgamesh, the former Hero King, is. Guhan let out a long sigh, and walked into the depths of the forest without hesitation. Chapter 9:12. Why are you so slow? Seeing that Guhan finally appeared in front of him, Kwong 3 frowned and asked impatiently. I went to get reinforcements. Guhan looked in the direction of the amusement park's entrance. I think this is probably our only chance of winning. Don't be so pessimistic. Gilgamesh is not as powerful as you think. Kwong 3 seemed to be comforting Guhan and himself at the same time. Okay. Where is the entrance to the underground seal? You don't want us to dig a hole all the way down, do you? Guhan looked around and found no place that could be called an entrance. It's too late to dig a hole now. Kwong 3 pressed on the branch of a giant tree next to him. The trunk of the giant tree automatically opened an opening, revealing a deep passage inside. Looking at this passage, Guhan felt that it was particularly familiar. Isn't this the home of Zhetian Jendi that I went to in the game dungeon? Even the method of opening the door was exactly the same. The entrance was all designed in the hollow trunk. Who knows who copied who? Following the hollow of the tree trunk all the way down, Guhan finally landed in a hall. It's too dark. It would be great if there were some lights, Guhan said. The next moment, the whole world became bright. Countless fluorescent tubes illuminated the entire underground world as if it was daytime. This was a hall. This hall was very similar to the entrance to the Ibis temple, the lair of the 3 Egyptian gods that Guhan had been to before. It was an empty hall with a tightly shut door connected to it. Wait, I think I've seen this scene before. Seeing this scene, Guhan could not help but be stunned. Not only was the entrance to the hall exactly the same as the entrance to Zhetian Jendi's home, but even the scenery in the hall was exactly the same. Even the closed door was exactly the same. There was also a simple keyhole, and the door could be opened by inserting the key. If it weren't for the fact that they were separated by 2 different spaces, the boundary between the game and reality, Guhan would have thought that he had entered a dungeon again. The only difference was that this door was probably different from the door seen in the dungeon. The surface of this door was filled with all kinds of extremely complicated magic symbols and runes. Golden rays of light could be seen constantly trying to rush out from the inside of the gate. Every time the golden rays lit up, the runes on the gate would also emit an astonishing light, suppressing the golden rays from the inside of the gate. However, Guhan noticed that every time these runes pushed back the golden light, the runes themselves would be damaged to a certain extent. The golden light grew brighter and brighter, while the runes grew dimmer and dimmer. Do you see that sword? Kwong 3 pointed to a pattern on the wall next to the door and said. But the heavens had pity on him. Guhan couldn't see that this pattern was a sword, because only a small part of the sword's tip was left. If Kwong 3 hadn't pointed it out, Guhan would never have guessed that it was a sword. When I first came here, there was only a small part of the sword's picture left. Kwong 3 said leisurely. Later, as time went by, the picture of the sword also kept disappearing. So, I guessed that this might be a sign of how much damage Gilgamesh has done to the seal. Once this sword completely disappears, Gilgamesh will be able to break through the seal of the gate and break free from it. Originally, according to my calculations, the remaining length of the sword should be able to last for half a year, but this morning, there is only a little left. So, I estimate that in 4 hours, Gilgamesh will be able to break free from the seal of the gate. So, how should we enter the gate and fight Gilgamesh now? Do you want us to open the gate? Wouldn't that also release Gilgamesh? Guhan said. Of course, we can't open the gate, but we can enter from the small door next to it. Kwong 3 led Guhan to the side of the wall, but strangely, there was no trace of the small door that Kwong 3 mentioned on this wall. Look at the text annotations here. Kwong 3 pointed to a row of text on the wall and said, "This is China's ancient seal script." I spent a lot of effort to understand the meaning of these ancient seal scripts. This tells us that if Gilgamesh is about to break the seal, then we can form a team under the leadership of human sword-wielding warriors to fight Gilgamesh. As the hero king, Gilgamesh's greatest ability is to transform the famous weapons stored in his body into his avatars to fight. At the same time, each avatar represents one of Gilgamesh's lives. If these avatars are not killed, Gilgamesh will not truly die. The reason why we chose to seal Gilgamesh instead of killing him was not because we wanted to create trouble for future generations, but because the sealer was unable to completely kill Gilgamesh. They could only use the seal's power to constantly obliterate the avatars in Gilgamesh's body. When the seal is about to be broken, it will also be when Gilgamesh is at his weakest. The avatars in his body should be reduced to nothing, and that is the best time to kill Gilgamesh. Humans can also completely eliminate this scourge. After reading the explanation of the ancient seal script, Guhan finally understood the reason behind it. He nearly believed that his predecessors were idiots, like the legendary Bravehearts in Bravehearts and Dragons. They only sealed the dragon instead of killing it, thus causing trouble for future generations. So it was because of Gilgamesh's avatars. Then how do we enter this door? Guhan could not understand the ancient seal script, so he could only ask Kwong 3. It says that under the guidance of the Sword Maiden, we will naturally be able to open the entrance to the tiny door. Kwong 3 answered. Is that so? Upon hearing this, Guhan took out his Chijian sword and stabbed the tip of the sword into the wall. As the Sword Maiden touched the wall, a golden illusory light slowly extended from the tip of the sword, and finally turned into a round golden door of light. As long as one stepped into this door of light, he should be able to enter the sealed world of Gilgamesh. Let's go in. Kwong 3's voice was slightly trembling. It was unknown whether it was because he was still looking forward to this moment, or because he was afraid of this moment. Wait. I need to leave a signal. Guhan was not in a hurry to enter and close the door. Instead, he picked up the Chijian sword and carved a sentence on the wall, touch the wall with the tip of the sword. This was a way to tell Liunian Ling how to enter the door, and then he led Kwong 3 into the door of light. Welcome, welcome. This is the first companion I've seen after 700 years. When Guhan and Kwong 3 appeared in the door, they saw a somewhat unexpected scene. In Guhan and Kwong 3's imagination, Gilgamesh should be tied to a stone pillar or a wall with heavy chains and runes, enjoying the treatment that a prisoner should enjoy. But in fact, Gilgamesh was very elegantly sitting on a chair, and there was a table in front of the chair with steaming hot tea on the table. And this room had all kinds of facilities, such as a bed, a TV, toiletries, and so on. No matter how one looked at it, it did not look like a sealed place, but more like a well-treated prison. The only thing missing in this cell was clothes, because Gilgamesh only had a pair of boxers on, revealing his perfect mermaid line, as well as his bright 16-pack abs. Coupled with Gilgamesh's handsome face that seemed to have been carved out by a knife, and his shiny golden hair that could blind a person's eyes. Just from this point of view, Gilgamesh was indeed the template of a perfect man. Unfortunately, Guhan did not pay attention to Gilgamesh's eyebrows. His attention was attracted by the scene inside the prison. Not only was the scene outside exactly the same as Jetian Gendi's house in the instance dungeon, the layout inside the door was also exactly the same as the layout inside the instance dungeon. This was a knockoff of Jetian Gendi's house. Could it be that this place was built by Jetian Gendi? However, for some unknown reason, it became Gilgamesh's prison. My two dear friends, before we officially start the battle, would you like to have a drink first? Gilgamesh raised the teacup in his hand and gestured to Guhan. Although you are going to die soon, I will miss our friendship. Who wants to drink your broken coffee? Kwong Three's face was filled with madness and anger. Is that evil energy coming from you? Are you the one who killed our king? I've killed a lot of people. There were Yuan Ku and humans. How would I know who the king is? Gilgamesh was not angry. Instead, he showed a king's smile. By the way, looking at your attire, you should be an elf. Come to think of it, I seem to have used my essence to control a male elf. The amount of essence in his body was unexpectedly large, and it helped me save 50 years of time. The king you were talking about should be him. Gilgamesh, I must kill you. Kwong Three desperately took out his pistol and aimed it at Gilgamesh's head. Why are you so angry? Isn't it better to die in peace? Gilgamesh lightly pointed his finger, and a short dagger broke through the void beside his head, directly colliding with the bullet shot by Kwong Three. Kwong Three's bullet was cut in half in an instant. At the same time, the dagger flew in the direction of the bullet. Kwong Three instinctively wanted to dodge Gilgamesh's dagger by teleporting. But in the next moment, Kwong Three's pupils instantly shrank to the size of a needle. She was horrified to find that her teleportation couldn't be used in this space. This was fatal for Kwong Three. Without teleportation, Kwong Three's dodging ability was even worse than that of the dragon-level Yuan Ku. Gilgamesh's dagger directly pierced into Kwong Three's head. Kwong Three's head exploded like a broken watermelon. Kwong Three didn't even have time to teleport, and her head was directly blown up by Gilgamesh. Chapter 9:13. Fishbowl Sword. Guhan clearly saw the appearance of the dagger that Gilgamesh shot out and shouted the name of the dagger. This dagger was actually the predecessor of Guhan's Duyu sword, the Fishbowl Sword. Gilgamesh actually had the Fishbowl Sword in his hand. Not bad, not bad. You can actually recognize the name of this sword. But this sword should be quite famous in your human world. When I first saw it, I felt that it looked very good, so I added it to my king's treasure house. Don't you think it's great? Gilgamesh said proudly, as if he was showing off the wealth in his treasure house to Guhan. I understand. Guhan suddenly remembered that in the human records, Gilgamesh had a magical power. He could copy all the weapons that he had seen with the naked eye into his king's treasure house. If the level of the weapon was lower than Gilgamesh's own level, then Gilgamesh could copy the power of the weapon with 100% certainty. If the level of the weapon was higher than Gilgamesh's level, then Gilgamesh could only copy 1/20th of the weapon's power. Now you're the only one left. If you kneel in front of me and surrender to me, and offer your humble self-esteem, then this king will be merciful and let you live a little longer. When this king breaks this damn seal, then I will turn you into powder. Gilgamesh said very benevolently. Who said that I'm the only one left? Guhan looked at the ground beside him, and as a result, a shadow appeared out of thin air on the ground. There seemed to be something constantly shaking, and finally, a brand new Kwong Three emerged from the shadow. Why didn't you save me just now? The first thing that Kwong Three did after his rebirth was not to kill Gilgamesh, but to direct his anger at Guhan. With your swordsmanship, you should have been able to send that sword flying, right? Kwong Three was right. Just now, Guhan did have the ability to send the Fishbowl Sword flying, saving Kwong Three's life. That's not your real body, why should I waste my strength? Furthermore, you have the ability to teleport, so the Fishbowl Sword shouldn't be able to hurt you. Guhan frowned. Instead, why didn't you teleport just now? That will only work if I can teleport. Kwong Three said angrily. Gilgamesh seems to have completely sealed off the power of space. My teleportation ability can no longer be used here. No. Hearing Kwong Three's words, Gilgamesh quickly denied, I don't have the ability to seal space. The space here was sealed by the two girls who sealed me. If you want to blame someone, blame the two of them. It has nothing to do with me. You said it was two little girls who sealed you. Who are those two little girls? Guhan's eyes lit up. If he could find out who sealed Gilgamesh, he might be able to unravel the secret of Radiant's amusement park. Strange. Don't you know who sealed me? Gilgamesh, on the other hand, showed a strange expression. I thought you were ordered by those two little girls to kill me, but now it seems that's not the case. I don't know one of the two little girls who sealed me, but I know the other one even if she's burned to ashes. Gilgamesh's muscles bulged. Artoria, my dear and good disciple, she sealed me with her own hands and took away the supreme throne that belonged to me. She is indeed the disciple that I, Gilgamesh, have taught. Artoria is your grand disciple. Merlin is your disciple. Hearing Gilgamesh's words, Guhan was shocked. Guhan had also seen Artoria's master, great wizard Merlin. If Artoria was Gilgamesh's grand disciple, didn't that mean that Merlin was Gilgamesh's disciple? Oh, you know Merlin's name. It seems that after I was sealed here, my good disciple Merlin also came to this world. That's really interesting. Gilgamesh clenched his fist. By the way, is my good disciple Merlin dead? If he's not dead, it seems that there will be another name on my must-kill list when I get out. You won't have the chance to kill anymore. Guhan took a deep breath. Today, I will end you here. Little friend, you're very brave. But courage needs to be matched with strength. Let me see how strong you are. Gilgamesh flicked his finger, and the fishbowl sword floating beside him suddenly flew toward Guhan. The speed of this sword was about 3 times faster than the speed of the attack on Crazy 3. In the eyes of ordinary people, perhaps in the blink of an eye, the fishbowl sword was only a few centimeters away from Guhan's head. Clang! Guhan swung the Chidyen sword in his hand, and the fishbowl sword was bounced away. Gilgamesh's eyes lit up when he saw this nimble movement. Interesting. Interesting. Gilgamesh couldn't help but applaud as if he had seen an interesting play. Your reaction is really good. It has the shadow of Fleeting Year Calendar. No, even Fleeting Year Calendar at the famed sword level can't wield a sword like yours. Although he is only the most useless rookie at the famed sword level, your swordsmanship can surpass him. This is very praiseworthy. I have already raised my expectations for you by 1%. Let me see your performance again. As Gilgamesh applauded, 3 more voids appeared beside him, and 3 swords were projected out. They merged with the fishbowl sword and stared at Guhan like a tiger watching its prey. Yixian sword. Tianwen sword. Etian sword. Guhan's pupils shrank into a straight line. He couldn't help but recite the names of the 3 swords that had appeared. Guhan had seen all 3 swords before. They were Lionian Ling and his sword lady. Go. My little cuties, let me see how powerful this outstanding little friend is. As soon as Gilgamesh's voice fell, the 4 swords turned into 4 sword lights and attacked Guhan in turn. In an instant, the 4 swords surrounded Guhan and launched a thrilling siege. Because there were no restrictions on the user, the angles of the 4 swords were extremely tricky. They would often attack Guhan from angles that couldn't normally appear. Although Guhan was able to send them flying one by one in the end, this kind of battle made Guhan feel very uncomfortable after a long time. Sooner or later, his defense would fail. There's no other way. I can only use this move. Guhan gritted his teeth, and the power of the stars in his body poured into the Chidyen sword in his hand in a strange way. The surface of the Chidyen sword instantly emitted a strange blue color. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, swordsman kill. The shining blue Chidyen sword instantly hit the Tianwen sword's body. Previously, this kind of hit would at most send the Tianwen sword flying. However, it was different this time. When the 2 swords came into contact, the strange blue light suddenly invaded the Tianwen sword's body. The Tianwen sword let out a shrill sword cry and suddenly broke into pieces. It became a broken sword that fell to the ground and finally turned into specks of starlight that disappeared into the air. This was the magical power of the 9 swords of mysterious heaven. Sword soldier kill. The sword soldier kill, as the name suggested, was a killing power that specifically targeted weapons. If this attack hit the body, it wouldn't have a very strong effect, and it might even be worse than a normal attack. However, if this attack hit the weapon, the result would be different. Depending on the difference in the level of the weapon, it could directly cause the weapon to shatter. The Chijian sword was a famous sword lady, and her potential was an emperor sword lady. In terms of level, it was equivalent to suppressing the Tianwen sword by at least 3 levels. The Tianwen sword couldn't withstand this level of sword soldier kill at all, so it simply broke into pieces on the ground and turned into specks of starlight that disappeared. My baby. Seeing the Tianwen sword disappear, Gilgamesh actually spat out a mouthful of blood. He didn't think that breaking a sword could make Gilgamesh spit out blood. Could it be that the weapon that killed Gilgamesh in the king's treasure house could also cause actual damage to Gilgamesh? Guhan thought to himself. It was a pity that a killing move like the sword soldier kill could not be used continuously. This move required the adjustment of one's aura. Before Cruel Han finished adjusting his aura, the sword soldier kill could not be used again. However, Gilgamesh didn't know this. It seemed that he was worried about the Chijian sword in Guhan's hand. Gilgamesh waved his hand, and the 3 swords that surrounded Guhan all flew back to his side. I have the world's king's treasure house. Show your true face. Gilgamesh began to recite an ancient incantation. This incantation had a strong power, and the entire air began to tremble along with Gilgamesh's incantation. It could be imagined that once this incantation was completed, it would become an extremely strong power. Unfortunately, Gilgamesh couldn't recite this incantation in its entirety. This was because a shining golden blade had already appeared in front of Gilgamesh's chest. If Gilgamesh still insisted on reciting his incantation, he would probably pay the price of having his intestines pierced through. Damn brat! Gilgamesh had no choice but to stop his incantation. The 3 swords from before instantly appeared in front of his chest to block the blade of the Chijian sword. Then, he leaped away from Guhan's attack and angrily said, "Damn brat, why did you interrupt my incantation? Can't you let me finish reciting the incantation smoothly?" Only those idiots in the movies would let their opponents finish reciting their incantation. Guhan's sword knocked away the 3 swords in front of him, and he teleported again in front of Gilgamesh. However, this time, his target changed from Gilgamesh's stomach to Gilgamesh's neck. Impatient brat, where did the traditional virtue of your Chinese people go? There was a flash of light in Gilgamesh's hand, and a round object that didn't look like a sword, but more like a closed umbrella, blocked the cold blade of the sword. Isn't respecting the old and loving the young a traditional virtue of your Chinese people? I'm an old man who has lived for 6,500 years. Shouldn't you be a little more humble? Gilgamesh raised the long sword in his hand that looked like a closed umbrella. This was Gilgamesh's true weapon, the sword of defiance that could split the heavens and earth. Chapter 9:14. The sword of defiance in Gilgamesh's hand was a powerful divine sword, and it was also the famous divine weapon that had dominated the world for 200 years. However, what was interesting was that 100 years after Gilgamesh's disappearance, the sword of defiance that had been passed down on Earth since ancient times was unearthed in the ruins of ancient Berlin. It became an immortal sword that fought for humanity. Go to hell! Guhan muttered as his figure appeared beside Gilgamesh once again. From the looks of it, Guhan was planning on using a storm-like attack to crush Gilgamesh. In fact, this was a very correct decision. This was because almost all the historical records had such a record. That was, the mighty hero King Gilgamesh was a person who wasn't good at melee combat. What he loved to do the most was to stand far in the sky and use his infinite number of divine weapons to tear his enemies to pieces. There were very few records of melee combat. Gilgamesh seemed to be deliberately avoiding melee combat with his opponents. The only record of melee combat was recorded in a battle with Kunzu. Back then, Kunzu, who had mastered the myriad sword art, had caught Gilgamesh off guard. He had even sliced off his entire right arm, forcing Gilgamesh to create a few avatars to successfully escape. In the end, he no longer dared to provoke Kunzu again. Therefore, Guhan had always been attempting to pull Gilgamesh into the rhythm of melee combat. In fact, this was a very easy task. This was because the battlefield wasn't a vast and boundless world. Instead, it was a narrow space the size of 1 or 2 basketball courts. This was a battlefield that was almost tailor-made for melee combat. Guhan believed that it was the greatest chance of victory. But soon, Guhan realized that it wasn't easy to pull Gilgamesh into melee combat in such a narrow space. After using a few high-speed movements to open up a distance between him and Guhan, the unlucky Gilgamesh returned the replicas of Heavenly Sword, Yuchang Sword, and Restful Immortal Sword to his side. He revealed a kingly smile and said to Guhan, "How about I find a few beautiful ladies to be your opponents?" What beautiful ladies? What opponent? Just as Guhan was feeling puzzled, Gilgamesh tapped the hilt of the Sword of Defiance against the sword hilt of the Sword of Defiance. The 3 swords simultaneously released a dazzling light and began to rapidly transform in the air. It looked exactly like the process of the Sword Maiden's liberation. In reality, when the light faded, 3 girls that Guhan was very familiar with appeared in front of Guhan. Yi Tian, Yi Xian, and Yu Chang, the 3 valiant and formidable-looking sword ladies stood with their swords in their hands, looking awe-inspiring as they looked at Ling exactly the same. Guhan carefully sized up the 3 sword ladies' replicas, and realized that no matter if it was in terms of clothing or appearance, they were all impeccably similar. Perhaps Yi Xian and Yu Chang's sword didn't have the right to speak, but Yi Tian and Guhan were persuasive enough. After all, Guhan and Yi Tian had been together for more than 3 months, and the skin and flesh that was exposed outside of their clothes was deeply engraved in Guhan's memory. He would definitely not be mistaken. Although Guhan wanted to take a few more glances, the 3 replicas clearly didn't intend to give Guhan any more chances. As soon as they were liberated, they immediately surrounded Guhan with their swords in hand, and began to fight with Guhan. After 7 or 8 exchanges, Guhan had a rough idea of the Sword Maiden replica's strength. First of all, these Sword Ladies' replicas didn't just replicate the Sword Maiden's appearance, but also their sword techniques. For example, the few sword strikes he had exchanged with Heavenly Sword's clone were completely in line with Heavenly Sword's battle style and sword techniques. Heavenly Sword was adept at using continuous and unceasing sword moves to bring his opponent into his own rhythm, and then completely destroy his opponent. However, replicas were still replicas. Just like the man-made sword ladies, they didn't have their own emotions. The artificial Sword Maiden's eyes were empty, showing her idiotic personality. Meanwhile, the Sword Lady's replica's eyes were filled with crimson flames, and apart from killing, there were no other emotions in their minds. They were just weapons through and through. Boring. After figuring out the Sword Lady's replica's methods, Guhan felt extremely bored. All creations that lacked a soul had a special characteristic, and that was that no matter how powerful their abilities were, they would always operate in a rigid and inflexible manner. In the eyes of others, this might be a sign of power and not making mistakes. However, in Guhan's eyes, this sweater was filled with flaws. It looked very thick, and it also felt very warm when worn. However, with just a slight tug, he would be able to discover countless flaws. At the same time, Guhan felt a deep sense of anger. When he saw the sword ladies he was familiar with being turned into replicas by the enemy, waves of anger uncontrollably blossomed from the bottom of his heart. Shatter. In an instant, the sword of origin in Guhan's hand seemed to tear through space. No one could clearly see what had happened, but the 3 sword ladies' replicas were sent flying at the same time, smashing heavily into the surrounding walls. After the 3 sword ladies' replicas landed on the ground, they did not stand up again. This was because their upper bodies had lost most of their flesh and blood, revealing their empty abdomens. With just one slash, Guhan had killed all the Sword Ladies' replicas. Although the Sword Maidens didn't have blood, they still had internal organs. However, through the openings on the abdomen of these replicas, they could clearly see that the stomachs of these replicas were empty, except for pink, slowly moving muscles. It was like a ceramic Buddha statue placed in a house. From the outside, it looked like a benevolent Buddha, but if you looked through the base, you could see that it was empty inside. Clap, clap, clap. Gilgamesh applauded enthusiastically. Very powerful swordsmanship, very exciting. You're next. Guhan stared at Gilgamesh and said. No, no, no. Gilgamesh shook his head. The wealth in my treasury is like the Milky Way in the sky. I'll give you 3 more of these useless replicas. After saying that, Gilgamesh kicked the broken sword lady's replicas in disdain, and they all turned into starlight and disappeared. At the same time, the void around Gilgamesh broke open again, and the previously disappeared Ichen sword, and Yuchang sword once again flew out of the void, turning into perfect sword ladies' replicas. How is it? My treasury isn't bad, right? Gilgamesh looked at the 3 sword ladies' replicas standing in front of him, but they've already been defeated by you, so I'll find some helpers for them. After Gilgamesh finished speaking, 4 more swords flew out from his king's treasure house. Finally, they transformed into sword maidens and joined the besieging Ji Han. Seeing this scene, Guhan couldn't help but lick his lips. Guhan could still recognize these sword ladies. They were Mingyue's sunset sword, Yu Wang's Gojin sword, Miaobi's light concealing sword, and Yaoguang's Big Dipper sword. Unlike the previous 4 sword ladies, these 4 swords were all famed sword ladies, so the difficulty of fighting them was clearly several times higher. But in reality, this wasn't all, because in the next moment, 4 more sword ladies flew out of Gilgamesh's king's treasury. Guhan had never seen these 4 sword ladies in person, but Guhan was sure that they were all spirit sword ladies. But it wasn't over yet. In the end, Gilgamesh even released the sword of obedience in his hand, turning it into an immortal sword lady and joining in the battle. Now, Ji Han had to face the combined attacks of 12 sword ladies. Among them, there was 1 immortal sword lady, 4 spirit sword ladies, 4 famed sword ladies, 2 treasure sword ladies, and 1 ancient sword lady. In fact, these famed, artifact, and ancient sword maidens couldn't be treated according to their own levels. With Gilgamesh's strength, the Yixian sword, which was the lowest level among these sword maidens, had combat strength equivalent to that of a famed sword maiden. Damn it, between me and Gilgamesh, who's the real sword bearer? Guhan complained as he looked at the 12 sword ladies in front of him. In the underground of the Radiance amusement park, where Gilgamesh was sealed, the thrilling battle between Guhan and Gilgamesh was still going on. But unlike Guhan's earlier display of power, Guhan was now in an extremely dangerous situation. In this 12 versus 1 battle, Ji Han was already destined to lose from the very beginning. The battle prowess of the 4 spirit sword maidens was already at the limit of what Ji Han could barely defeat, but the problem was that in addition to these 4 spirit sword maidens, there was also the existence of the immortal sword Unruly Sword. What was even more terrifying was that this sword of obedience was not a replica from the king's treasury, but a real sword that belonged to Gilgamesh. Therefore, this sword of obedience did not rely on its combat instincts to fight. Instead, it was being controlled by Gilgamesh's will, which was quietly floating in the air. In other words, Gilgamesh had actually joined the battle, but he was borrowing the body of his sword of obedience. This was the combat power of a real immortal sword lady. In less than 2 minutes, Guhan had already fallen into a state of certain death. And this was because the sword of obedience controlled by Gilgamesh was slacking off. It did not directly join the encirclement against Guhan, but stayed outside the encirclement to hold the line. From time to time, it would stab at Guhan from a certain angle, forcing him to retreat to defend himself. As a result, an opening appeared in a certain direction, allowing him to take the attacks of the other sword ladies. This caused Ji Han to be extremely puzzled. Why didn't Gilgamesh directly join the attack? If that was the case, Guhan's losses would be far greater than what he was currently suffering. Chapter 9:15. What exactly is this Gilgamesh afraid of? Of course, Guhan did not think that Gilgamesh was simply toying with him. Guhan could feel that Gilgamesh was actually estimating something, which was why he did not dare to join the siege against Guhan and could only secretly help from the side. Moreover, he was also very careful about his power, not daring to use too much of it. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword of the abyss, golden chrysanthemum. No matter what Gilgamesh was afraid of, if Guhan did not find a way to break the current stalemate, then Guhan would really die under the siege of these replicas. So, Guhan mustered up the star power equivalent to 15,000 quarks in his body and used the evolved version of Sword of the Abyss, Golden Chrysanthemum. The golden chrysanthemum-like sword chi harvested the replicas' bodies in this narrow space. Big capital really did pay big dividends. Under the attack of Sword of the Abyss, among the 11 sword maidens that besieged Guhan, except for the 4 spirit sword maidens, the bodies of the other sword maidens directly collapsed and disappeared into specks of starlight. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword of the vault of heaven. Although the bodies of the 4 spirit sword maidens did not directly collapse, they were still seriously injured. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Guhan directly used the strongest single-target killer move of the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword of the vault of heaven. With one move each, the 4 spirit sword maidens were sent back into the starlight. In the blink of an eye, the whole situation seemed to have been completely reversed. All the replicas in front of Guhan had disappeared, leaving only the sword maidens that Gilgamesh himself controlled. If Guhan could directly defeat the sword maidens, then it would be no different from directly defeating Gilgamesh. I didn't expect you to hide such a powerful killer move. But this is just a useless last-ditch struggle. Don't you understand how terrifying the king's treasure vault is? The sword maidens who had not spoken until now finally spoke. Although her voice was a standard crisp and sweet female voice, the tone of her voice was completely Gilgamesh's. However, the tone of the voice was completely Gilgamesh's. Gilgamesh was clearly borrowing the mouth of the unfilial sword to speak. The door to the king's treasure vault opened once more and the sword maidens that Guhan had destroyed charged out from the king's treasure vault. It was just like how the Etienne sword, the Yixian sword and the fishbowl sword had done in the beginning. In the blink of an eye, Guhan had cleared out all of the sword lady replicas. However, the replicas instantly returned, and Gilgamesh said carkily, "It's useless. Everything you've done is a deathbed struggle. You must have consumed a lot of sword essence to use that big move just now. Let me guess, how much power do you have left? 70%? 60%? Don't tell me it's less than 50%. But look, your opponents have returned. You've used up so much power, but it's just a waste. Even if you kill them 10 times or even 100 times, they will come out from my king's treasure vault again. Everything you've done is meaningless." If an ordinary person saw this scene and heard Gilgamesh's words, they would probably be so angry that they would directly vomit blood. However, Guhan actually laughed. He laughed very happily and very sincerely. "What are you laughing at? What's so funny?" Looking at Guhan's smile, Gilgamesh started to feel unhappy. "I'm laughing at you, don't tell me that you haven't noticed. You've lost one treasure from the king's treasure vault," Guhan said with a smile. Gilgamesh's complexion changed. This time, he had only summoned 10 sword maidens from the king's treasure vault, which was one less than before. "Actually, I've already noticed that you seem to be full of misgivings towards me." Guhan squinted his eyes and said, "But why would you have misgivings towards me? I thought of the Tianwen sword's replica that had completely disappeared. It seems that after I used sword soldier annihilation to destroy her, she never returned to the battlefield again. So, I suspected that I might have been very lucky to completely kill her. So, I mixed a sword soldier annihilation into my attack just now to deal with the Yixian sword." Guhan laughed even more happily. "Now, it seems that my suspicions were not wrong. The Yixian sword's replica did not appear again. Sword soldier annihilation is able to completely destroy the treasures in your king's treasure vault. Are you afraid that I will use this move to deal with your obedient sword? That's not a replica, it's the real deal. Once it's destroyed, it's really over. Come on. Now, I only need to use sword soldier annihilation. I want to see how many treasures in your king's treasure vault can be destroyed by my sword soldier annihilation." Guhan's threat had a huge effect. For a moment, Gilgamesh did not dare to move, afraid that the treasures in his king's treasure vault would once again be destroyed by Guhan. In fact, Guhan was completely bluffing. First of all, sword soldier annihilation had a very long cooldown. Otherwise, Guhan would have used sword soldier annihilation to deal with the replicas of the sword maidens. Moreover, sword soldier annihilation had different effects on different sword maidens. It was very effective against ancient and artifact sword replicas, but once it started to deal with famed sword replicas and above, it was somewhat powerless, not to mention the real celestial sword soldier annihilation. Guhan was trying to stall for time, waiting for his sword soldier annihilation's cooldown to be over. As long as he could completely kill another sword maiden replica, Guhan's battle would undoubtedly be much easier. Therefore, Gilgamesh did not dare to take the initiative to send his replicas to attack. Guhan was also afraid that attacking would expose the fact that his sword soldier annihilation had a cooldown. Both sides just stared at each other. On the other side, a large black bird flew across the sky of the Radiance amusement park. In less than a minute, the large bird flew from the core of the Radiance amusement park to the edge of the Norland Plains, which was also the entrance that Guhan and Jiu Xuanwu used to enter the Radiance amusement park. The large bird landed on the ground and slowly retracted its wings into its body. Its pair of bird claws gradually transformed into a pair of delicate and adorable feet. The large bird also instantly turned into a human. This human was Ashima. It turned out that Ashima's Yuan Ku form was actually a monster. Ashima had relied on his monster form to reach the exit of the Radiance amusement park so quickly. Ashima skillfully drew a few runes in the empty air, and the golden door of light from before opened again. Ashima stepped through the door of light and returned to the world of Shanhai Pass. Keeping Guhan's instructions in mind, Ashima did not dare to waste even a second. She quickly rushed out of the cave and arrived at the edge of the barrier of the Ju-Tien Star Battle Formation. Just as she was about to pass through the barrier, she was repelled by the barrier. The flashing electric current charred Ashima's body, and she almost died from the power of the Ju-Tien Star Battle Formation. P2E. I actually forgot to turn back into my human form. A puff of black smoke came out of Ashima's mouth, and then she closed her eyes with a wry smile. The dimensional energy surrounding Ashima's body instantly disappeared, and her charred body quickly turned snow white. Finally, she turned back into the fair-skinned, big-breasted Ashima. Phew. Ashima took a deep breath and stretched out a finger to test the barrier of the Ju-Tien Star Battle Formation. As expected, no electric current attacked Ashima this time. Ashima finally exhaled the breath in her stomach and stepped through the barrier. The moment she left the Ju-Tien Star Battle Formation, she regained control of the sword element that was suppressed by the power of the stars because there was no flag planting ceremony. The quantum signal that was suppressed by the power of the stars also regained its connection, which meant that Ashima could contact the major base cities through her personal terminal. Hello. Ashima dialed the communication device of Jerusalem base city. Your Highness. It's really you, Your Highness. An excited voice came from the other end of the communication device. Recently, the people of Jerusalem had not been having a good time. Because they were worried about the safety of their Highness, or rather, worried about the safety of the precious Anra sword maiden in Her Highness's hands, all the people of Jerusalem lived in fear. If the leader had not insisted that Ashima's soul was still shining, perhaps Jerusalem would have fallen into internal strife. I'll contact the leader right now. Before the staff member on the other end of the communication could finish speaking, he was forcefully interrupted by Ashima. Now is not the time to contact the leader. Connect me to the communication device of the Sunstar garrison in Shanhai Pass immediately. Hurry up, I have something very important to talk to them about. Although Ashima was now much closer to the Sunstar garrison than to the Sunstar garrison in Jerusalem, because of the suppression of quantum communication, Ashima had no choice but to contact Liuonian Ling through the special communication channel in Jerusalem and Shanhai Pass. Otherwise, it would be impossible to contact Liuonian Ling with the personal terminal in his hand. Yes. Although the staff member did not understand what was going on, he still quickly connected the communication device of the Sunstar garrison. Then, the communication was quickly transferred from the Sunstar garrison to Liuonian Ling's personal terminal. Ashima, it's great that you're okay. Liuonian Ling's voice sounded much softer than the previous Jerusalemites, but the emotion in this sentence was directed at Ashima, unlike the Jerusalemites, who was only directed at the Anra sword maiden in Ashima's hand. I'm fine, but I'm afraid your little lover is in trouble. At this time, Ashima did not forget to joke with Liuonian Ling. What do you mean? On the other end of the communication device, Liuonian Ling instantly became anxious. He seems to be fighting Gilgamesh. I think if you don't come to help him, he's definitely dead. Where are you? After asking for Ashima's location, Liuonian Ling directly hung up the communication, unwilling to even say a word to Ashima. Chapter 9:16. On the other side, at Gilgamesh's seal, the stalemate was still ongoing. Just as Guhan thought this stalemate would last a little longer, when Gilgamesh himself realized something was wrong, a new change came to the battle. This change did not come from Guhan or Gilgamesh himself, but from the sealed space. A fluorescent lamp installed at the top of the sealed space suddenly began to flicker. What's going on? Is the light starter broken? Seeing the fluorescent lamp flicker, Guhan instinctively began to suspect that the light starter was broken. But very soon, Guhan reacted. This was the place where Gilgamesh had been sealed for hundreds of years, so how could the fluorescent lamp here be an ordinary one? Or rather, why did the person who had sealed Gilgamesh back then install a fluorescent lamp here? There was no need for this at all. Unlike the confused Guhan, when Gilgamesh saw the fluorescent lamp start to flicker, he seemed to become excited. It was an excitement that contained both hatred and happiness, as if this was something Gilgamesh had been looking forward to for a long time. Not good. Could there be a problem here? Jiyu-Han instinctively felt that something was wrong, and at the same time, the flickering fluorescent tube let out a loud explosion, and the entire tube exploded into pieces. It was also at this moment that the fluorescent lamp's light starter shot out a machine-like beam of light, targeting Gilgamesh who was standing in the distance. Go! Gilgamesh's main body opened his eyes, and all the sword Maiden replicas surrounding Gilgamesh charged in the direction of the laser beam, attempting to use their bodies to block the laser beam. The first to face the beam was Yi Tian replica, but she very quickly turned into nothingness under the beam's illumination. Next was Fish Guts, followed by 4 famed Sword Maiden replicas, and 4 Spirit Sword Maiden replicas, but when all 10 Sword Maiden replicas were turned into nothingness, the beam's energy seemed to have been depleted to the point where only a little remained. Looking at the last remaining bit of the beam, Gilgamesh decisively stretched out his left hand. Under the attack of the laser, Gilgamesh's left hand below the arm turned into a puff of black smoke. However, the energy of the laser was limited to that and could no longer cause any more damage to Gilgamesh. It's over. It's finally over. Gilgamesh did not show any sadness when he saw his arm disappear. Instead, he revealed a crazy smile and shouted that it was finally over. At the same time, Guhan noticed that the golden light and various runes covering the walls of the sealed area were rapidly fading away, leaving only a mottled ancient wall and an equally ancient gate. Could it be that the power of the entire sealed land had disappeared? Didn't this mean that Gilgamesh's power had completely lost its suppression? At this moment, the other Gilgamesh's aura began to swell rapidly. Gilgamesh originally gave off the feeling of a ferocious lion, but now this feeling had evolved into that of a berserk Tyrannosaurus Rex, and its aura had increased more than tenfold. However, this also proved that the power of the seal had completely disappeared. Gilgamesh had finally recovered his full power. Are you curious as to why this happened? At this moment, Gilgamesh was in a rather good mood. Hence, according to the traditional villain setting, he began explaining the entire sequence of events. P.S. Author, although I also feel that it is a very stupid thing to let Gilgamesh explain the sequence of events at this moment, the problem is that if you don't explain it now, there won't be a better time to explain it. Anyway, be it domestically or overseas, everyone has agreed to do so. Author, please do so. Let us welcome Gilgamesh to explain the sequence of events. Sorry, I just made a small lie. Although my king's treasure vault does indeed have the most treasures in the world, that is already in the past. The 12 sword ladies from before were actually the last wealth in my king's treasure vault. As a king who was once rich in the world, I am deeply ashamed of this. Gilgamesh's face revealed a truly ashamed expression. As the hero king, he only had 12 treasures left in his king's treasure vault. This was indeed something to be ashamed of. By the way, back then, Kanzu had stolen a lot of information from me. He should have told you that every treasure in my king's treasure vault is equivalent to an avatar of mine. And as long as my avatars don't die, there is no way to truly kill me. Gilgamesh actually exposed his own shortcomings and told Guhan how to kill himself. Of course, just as Gilgamesh had said, this was already known by humans, so it was not considered revealing any important information. However, with Gilgamesh saying this, and connecting it to the information he had seen on the wall before entering, Guhan also understood what had just happened. Previously, the information on the wall had told Guhan that the sealed land possessed the power to constantly kill Gilgamesh's avatars. The moment when the seal was about to break was also the best time to kill Gilgamesh. From the looks of it, that was indeed the case. The fluorescent lamp was likely the core of the seal, but because it was designed to look like a fluorescent lamp, it made Guhan overlook this point in the beginning. Only now did he realize it. The laser beam shot out by the fluorescent lamp had the power to kill Gilgamesh's avatars. Over the centuries, the treasures in Gilgamesh's king's treasure vault should have been mostly depleted by the fluorescent lamp, leaving only the 12 sword ladies. It looks like you have understood it. Then, let me explain it to you more clearly. Speaking of which, why am I in such a good mood today to explain the ins and outs of the matter? Gilgamesh stroked his non-existent beard, as if he was very confused as to why he had to explain the ins and outs of the matter. The source of this seal comes from two forces, one in the south and one in the north, suppressing two spiritual swords, and that fluorescent lamp's light starter. It's these two darn things that kept this king suppressed here for hundreds of years. Following Gilgamesh's words, Guhan looked towards the north and south. Sure enough, he found two spiritual swords, one black and one white, suppressing two spiritual swords at the north and south, like the yin and yang fish of Taiji. It's actually the yin-yang Taiji sword. Seeing these two swords, Guhan's eyes widened. A puzzle that had puzzled mankind for hundreds of years had actually been solved at this moment. At the beginning of the apocalypse, mankind had discovered two spiritual swords, yin-yang Taiji sword. Just like their names, they were actually the same as Ganjiang Mo Xie, male and female Mandarin duck swords, and Yuan-Tu Avici twin swords. At the same time, they were also a pair of famous twin sword immortals in history who possessed spiritual swords. When these twin sword immortals were still at the spiritual sword level, they were invincible all over the world with their yin-yang Taiji sword. They even defeated most of the sword bearers at the immortal sword level at one time. Of course, this was because the twin brothers had joined forces. Otherwise, in a one-on-one fight, they really weren't that powerful. Their biggest advantage was the yin-yang Taiji sword in their hands. According to the inherited information, when the yin-yang Taiji sword was used together, it could form a yin-yang Taiji fish. All the attacking power would be swallowed by this yin-yang Taiji fish, and then turned into the sword bearer's own power. Just by listening to it, one could tell how powerful the yin-yang Taiji sword was. It was a pity that these twin brothers died in the hands of a flood-level Yuan Ku. Otherwise, there might be a pair of twin Gendi in human history. Then, maybe the second most powerful Gendi in history would be Gendi Zhaotian. When the twin brothers died, the yin-yang Taiji sword had completely disappeared, and no one knew where these two swords had gone. Later generations had excavated the battlefield where the twin brothers died countless times. Later, two Gendi worked together to capture the flood-level Yuan Ku who killed the twin brothers. They used the most vicious punishment, but they still couldn't find the shadow of this pair of swords. Later, mankind could only helplessly give up the search, but no matter how many years had passed, the second and third places on the spirit sword record were always occupied by the yin-yang Taiji sword. Except for the time when it gave way to the first place, it had never retreated even one place. Unexpectedly, Guhan saw traces of the yin-yang Taiji sword here. It turned out that these two swords were taken by Artoria to seal Gilgamesh. It was no wonder that after so many years, mankind couldn't find any trace of these two swords. According to Gilgamesh, in addition to this pair of yin-yang Taiji swords, the most crucial part of the whole seal was the fluorescent lamp's light starter. Guhan then turned his attention to the light starter and suddenly felt that this light starter was very familiar. Oh my god, isn't this exactly the same as the white dwarf key that Guhan once had? It was just that this key was used to forge a new body for the Chijian sword more than 10 days ago. Speaking of which, this key should be in the body of the Chijian sword now, so why was there an identical key here? Could it be that when this key was forged back then, it was forged in two? This pair of yin-yang Taiji swords is indeed very powerful. It can constantly absorb the power of my doppelgangers from my body and then transfer this power to the white dwarf fragment. On the other side, Gilgamesh was still explaining the ins and outs of the matter. Speaking of which, this white dwarf key is a treasure in this king's treasure vault. It was once one of this king's most powerful doppelgangers. Unfortunately, it was made into my greatest nemesis by Artoria's disciple's disciple. Once this white dwarf key fragment absorbs enough power through the yin-yang taiji sword, it will turn this power back to attack me and destroy my other doppelgangers. It's really despicable. However, all of this king's doppelgangers are dead now. The Tai Chi yin-yang sword can no longer absorb this king's own power to seal this king. Therefore, the entire seal has completely disappeared. The white dwarf fragment can also return to this king's hand. Gilgamesh finally finished explaining the ins and outs of the matter, and his whole body revealed a happy smile. Chapter 9:17. I'm finally done explaining. Gilgamesh had explained so much to Guhan, but Guhan had only analyzed two of the most important things. The first was that Gilgamesh had now lost the suppression of the seal, and he had the power of a peak universe-level Yuan Ku, which was equivalent to half a flood-level Yuan Ku. The second was that Gilgamesh only had one life left. If Gilgamesh could be killed now, then Gilgamesh would never be resurrected, and it would be time for this sinful hero king to end his sinful life. However, it was extremely difficult to accomplish such a thing. It was completely impossible for the current Ji Han. If it wasn't for the threat of the heavenly cycle star formation, it would have been impossible for him to do so. Guhan's first reaction was to escape immediately. After all, Gilgamesh couldn't pose too much of a threat to the base city. What truly made Ji Han apprehensive was the heavenly cycle star array. Once Gilgamesh broke through the dimensional rift and entered the mountain sea pass, the entire heavenly cycle star array would lose its balance due to Gilgamesh's participation. All the human sword-bearers in the mountain sea pass might very well die as a result. Right after that, the 12 ancestral Magi would break out of the array. Just the thought of it made him feel sour. All right. Now, let me send you on your way. Gilgamesh still maintained his king's smile. With a gentle slash of the sword of obedience in his hand, it opened a void door, and then his entire body entered the void. Seeing this scene, other than a bitter smile, Ji Han could not show any other expression. This was the way Yuan Ku, who was above universe level, crushed sword-bearers below immortal sword tier. No matter how powerful the sword-bearer was, before becoming an immortal sword tier sword-bearer, they couldn't feel the power of the void. At this time, Yuan Ku, who was above universe level, only needed to open a void door and enter the void. Then, he could attack his opponent from any place and position. It sounded similar to invisibility, but it was much more advanced than invisibility. Invisibility was just hiding one's body. In reality, one was still in this space. Every action would inevitably cause various movements, and a powerful sword master could determine the movements of the invisibility person based on these movements. Therefore, invisibility was not difficult for Guhan to deal with. On the contrary, as long as Guhan could see the opponent's position, then with the unique weakness of invisibility, it would be much easier for Guhan to fight. However, entering the void was completely different. After entering the void, one had to have the power of the void and be able to sense the fluctuations of the void. Otherwise, it would be equivalent to Guhan completely losing his 5 senses, and he would no longer be able to find a trace of the enemy. For example, at this time, a small void door suddenly opened behind Guhan, and the tip of the sword of obedience pierced out from this void door at an extremely fast speed. Even though Guhan sensed the presence of the sword of obedience the moment it left the void, it was too late. Guhan had no time to dodge at all, and the sword of obedience stabbed into his back. Guhan's entire body was sent flying, and at the same time, the shield around him trembled violently. 200. At the moment he was sent flying, Guhan could clearly feel that the upper limit of the sword essence in his body had been reduced by 200 quarks. Fortunately, Guhan was holding the Chidyen sword. Otherwise, according to Guhan's previous estimation, a quark of sword essence could resist about 3,000 points of damage, and Gilgamesh's sword had directly caused 600,000 points of damage. If Guhan was holding the Juzi sword, then the damage would be enough to pierce through Guhan's shield 3 times, which also meant that the opponent could kill Guhan with one strike. A normal attack from an ordinary Infinity Yuan Ku would only cause 100,000 points of damage, but a casual strike from Gilgamesh had caused 600,000 points of damage. From this, it could be seen that the human records of Gilgamesh were not wrong. He was indeed the top of the Infinity Yuan Ku, and his strength was several times that of an ordinary Infinity Yuan Ku. On the other side, Gilgamesh was also amazed. He did not expect Guhan to be able to take his sword head-on, but his shield still did not break. In his life, he had only seen one famed sword-level swordsman who could do this. I find that you are becoming more and more like that human. Gilgamesh walked out of the void and looked at Guhan with a somewhat solemn expression. I remember when I had just arrived in this world, I met that guy for the first time in a place that you humans call Wuhan City. He actually organized a decent difficulty. I couldn't help but feel an itch to attack that difficulty. I thought that all the humans inside were dead, so I didn't care and just left. I didn't expect that there would be a famed sword-level swordsman who survived. If I had given him one more sword strike, perhaps you humans would have already gone extinct. The man that Gilgamesh was talking about was naturally Kunzu. Guhan was very clear about this part of the story, and it was also the greatest pain in Kunzu's life. At that time, he had been working hard to help the human survivors escape from their predicament, and had paid a great price for it, but everything he had done had been destroyed by a sword strike from a passing Yuan Ku. Later, in countless interviews, Kunzu felt endless pain at this moment, and swore that one day, he would definitely kill that Yuan Ku with his own sword. When people asked Kunzu who this damned Yuan Ku was, Kunzu told everyone that only after he personally killed this Yuan Ku would he have the right to announce this Yuan Ku's name. Later on, Kunzu never succeeded in killing this Yuan Ku, and humans never knew who this passing Yuan Ku was. Now, it seemed that the truth had been revealed. This Yuan Ku was Gilgamesh. It was no wonder that Kunzu and Gilgamesh had always been at loggerheads, and both sides constantly fought until Gilgamesh became afraid of Kunzu, and began to deliberately avoid Kunzu. Only then did this endless battle temporarily come to an end. Looks like I have to learn my lesson this time, and directly crush you here and now. I don't want another person like that man to appear in this world. Gilgamesh finally revealed a serious expression on his face, no longer wearing his usual disdainful smile of a king. Once again, he opened a void gate and entered the void. In the next moment, the obedient sword once again appeared from the void without any warning, and once again sent Guhan flying before he could react in time. While Guhan was still flying through the air, the tip of the obedient sword appeared in Guhan's path of flight, and once again whipped at Guhan's body, sending Guhan flying in another direction. Gilgamesh was like a badminton player who could appear in any position on a badminton court at any time, using the obedient sword in his hand as a badminton racket, while Guhan became a pitiful badminton that Gilgamesh wantonly toyed with. As the one being beaten, Guhan could not resist at all, and could only grit his teeth and silently endure the blows with his sword essence. Perhaps Gilgamesh was finally tired, but after more than 50 consecutive strikes, he finally allowed Guhan to fall to the ground. The impact created a huge crack in the ground. The dizzy Gu Han discovered that after the series of attacks, the upper limit of the sword essence in his body had been reduced by more than 10,000 points. Gu Han originally had more than 45,000 quarks of sword essence in his body, but now he had lost more than 10,000 points of sword essence. After being beaten like a badminton for a while, he was left with less than 35,000 points, a direct loss of about a quarter of his strength. At this moment, Guhan could not help but recall the conjecture he had after discovering the defensive characteristics of the Chijian sword. At that time, Guhan imagined that he could use the Chijian sword to fight against U-level Yuan Ku. This had already been realized. Guhan was indeed fighting against Yuan Ku, who was equivalent to half a flood level. Guhan also imagined that he might be beaten back to his original form by the Chijian sword and become an ordinary person without sword essence. This seemed to be happening. If the attacks just now were to be repeated 3 more times, Guhan would be completely beaten back to an ordinary person. I can't go on like this. I have to think of a way to hold on a little longer. Guhan used the Chijien sword to barely support his dizzy body. In less than a minute, Guhan had lost his upper limit of 10,000 quarks of sword essence. Guhan had to think of a way to solve this predicament, or else Guhan could only hold on for 3 more minutes. Guhan did not think that Liuyan Ling would be able to rush over in 3 minutes. According to Guhan's calculations, even if he pushed his speed to the limit, Liuyan Ling would still need at least 30 minutes to rush over. Guhan had to think of a way to hold on for another 30 minutes. You really surprise me more and more. The series of attacks just now made Gilgamesh start to pant slightly. Such frequent attacks through the void was a very strenuous thing for the universe-class Yuan Ku. Gilgamesh thought that he would be able to kill Guhan with 4 or 5 strikes at most, but he did not expect that after 50 strikes, Guhan would still stand up as if nothing had happened. There was not a single wound on his body, and all his attacks were forcefully taken in by the opponent's personal shield. Even if Khunzu was reborn, Gilgamesh was confident that he could cut the famed sword-class fleeting year calendar into minced meat within 10 strikes. If it was not for the fact that Guhan's aura could not lie, Gilgamesh would have thought that he had met a pretentious immortal-class swordsman, and not a famed sword-class swordsman that Gilgamesh could easily crush. However, this also made Gilgamesh even more determined to kill. Gilgamesh had been chased by Khunzu, and he did not want to fall into the hands of a human again after his rebirth. Forget it. I'm not going to play with you in the void anymore. Gilgamesh flicked his finger slightly and walked out of the void. Come on. The king will be merciful and let you see the king's armor. The sword of defiance in Gilgamesh's hand suddenly dispersed like a machine, turning into a dozen or so different parts. These parts then began to assemble with Gilgamesh's body as the center. Finally, they completely wrapped around Gilgamesh's body, turning it into a sparkling golden armor. This was the reason why Gilgamesh was called the Shining Golden Armor. It was because of this dazzling holy armor of disobedience. Chapter 9:18. If not for the fact that the Saint Seiya swore to the heavens that Gilgamesh had nothing to do with the Saint Seiya, everyone who saw Gilgamesh would think that he was one of the Saint Seiya, because whether it was in shape, appearance, or the way he wore it, it was exactly the same as the Saint Seiya's golden saint suit. The most similar part was the dazzling golden color that could blind a person's eyes. It was as if they were carved from the same mold. This also meant that Gilgamesh had revealed his strongest combat form. In fact, in Gilgamesh's hands, rather than a sword, it would be more appropriate to call it a staff. In Gilgamesh's hands, the obedient sword could not truly shine with the brilliance of a sword. In fact, the obedient sword was not just a simple sword, one could see this from its mountain-like body. The true form of the obedient sword was the form of the obedient holy suit that Gilgamesh was currently wearing, and Gilgamesh's true weapon was also revealed at this moment. Gilgamesh, who was wearing the obedient holy suit, suddenly made a posture of drawing a bow. At the same time, a golden bow and arrow automatically appeared in Gilgamesh's hands. The obedient sword, which had already transformed into the obedient holy suit, suddenly appeared on the bowstring of this golden bow and arrow. Obviously, at this moment, the obedient sword had become the obedient arrow, and Gilgamesh had also changed from a swordsman to an archer. It's the obedient arrow. Seeing this scene, Guhan also understood that his most critical moment had arrived. Just like Hu Yi's strongest killer move, the sunset arrow, which could only be used once a month, the obedient arrow was also Gilgamesh's strongest killer move. But the obedient arrow was different from the sunset arrow. The sunset arrow could only be used once a month, but the obedient arrow did not have this restriction. As long as Gilgamesh's own strength was enough to support the phantom image of the obedient arrow would appear endlessly until his opponent became a corpse. Come, my baby. The corners of Gilgamesh's mouth curled slightly, and he loosened his fingers on the bowstring, successfully releasing the unfilial arrow. It was said that the unfilial arrow could reach a speed of 1/10,000th of the speed of light. It was a speed that Guhan simply could not react to. Before Guhan could raise his Chijien sword, the unfilial arrow had already struck Guhan's forehead. A deafening roar that sounded like more than 10 tons of TNT exploded, coupled with the explosive effect of hundreds of boxes of fireworks exploding at the same time. Thick smoke instantly occupied the entire space. Even Gilgamesh could not see Guhan's situation clearly from dozens of meters away. He should be dead. No famed swordsman can survive the obedient arrow. Gilgamesh had wanted to say that no famed swordsman could survive the obedient arrow, but he was glad that he did not finish his sentence. Because when Gilgamesh's strong wind blew away all the smoke in the space, the human was still standing firmly in front of him, and his body was still unharmed. This human. Gilgamesh was faintly unable to control himself. The damage of the unfilial arrow was the most powerful move he could use among the conventional skills he could use. Such a move could even instantly kill a spirit sword tier swordsman, and even an immortal sword tier swordsman would flee in panic upon seeing it. What kind of ability did this little famed sword tier swordsman have to survive the unfilial arrow? On the other hand, although Ji Yuhan appeared to be very calm and the obedient arrow did not cause any damage to him, in truth, Ji Yuhan knew that he was suffering. That attack just now had directly consumed the upper limit of 3,000 quarks of Guhan's sword essence. This kind of attack was no longer the damage that an Eon-tier swordsman like Yuan Ku could inflict. This kind of damage was extremely close to the damage that a flood-tier swordsman like Yuan Ku could inflict. Gilgamesh was indeed worthy of being called a half-flood-tier swordsman like Yuan Ku. Interesting. Interesting. I'd like to see how many more of my arrows you can take. The snow-white flesh on Gilgamesh's face trembled unconsciously. At the same time, the shadow of the unfilial arrow began to charge again. It would only take a few seconds for the next unfilial arrow to appear. With Guhan's current reaction speed, this arrow was simply unavoidable. Right now, Guhan only had an upper limit of 30,000 quarks of sword essence left. In other words, Guhan could at most withstand the attack of 10 more unfilial arrows. No, perhaps he could only withstand 7 more arrows, because after 7 arrows, the upper limit of Guhan's sword essence would exceed the minimum limit of 10,000 quarks of a famed sword tier. If that happened, whether or not Guhan could still use the Chijian sword was a big question mark. 3 green lotus swords, green lotus white lotus body. Guhan also understood that the battle had already reached its final juncture. He was afraid that he would have to bring out his trump card. He had to hold on until Liuonian Ling arrived. Only then would the Ju Tian Star battle formation have a final chance of survival. Therefore, Guhan could only use the green lotus white lotus body once again. Although he clearly knew that using the 3 green lotus swords would cause extremely serious side effects, every time he used the green lotus white lotus body, the progress of the second sword of the 3 green lotus swords would be further improved. Guhan had no other choice at this time. Yin-Yang sword technique, Juzi sword. At the same time, Guhan directly used the Yin-Yang sword technique as well. At the same time, he grasped the Juzi sword in his hand. Go. After the Yin-Yang sword technique finished preparing, Gilgamesh's unfilial arrow also finished preparing at the same time. The illusory unfilial arrow shot out once again. Then, there was another explosion, and another sky full of dust. But this time, Gilgamesh couldn't help but frown, because he discovered that his unfilial arrow didn't seem to hit its target. Could it be that this famed sword-level swordsman had the ability to dodge his unfilial arrow? Just as he was thinking about this, Gilgamesh's expression suddenly changed. Golden light flashed as he suddenly leapt backwards, but this leap seemed to be a bit too late, because the 2 famed swords had already struck the gap between Gilgamesh's unfilial holy robe, causing a bit of bright red blood to splatter in the air. I'm actually injured. Gilgamesh touched his waist and felt a bright red bloodstain, but this bloodstain wasn't much, obviously just a small wound. It was about the size of a cut on a finger when sharpening a pencil. In reality, this small wound probably didn't even cause 10 points of damage. Gilgamesh was almost equivalent to a super big boss with tens of millions of HP, so the actual meaning of 10 points of damage could be imagined. But from another point of view, this had great meaning. That was, it meant that Gilgamesh wasn't invincible to the extent where he couldn't be injured. Guhan still had the strength to defeat Gilgamesh. Human. What did you do? You can actually injure me, Gilgamesh asked Guhan, who was gradually emerging from the dust. Guhan didn't give any explanation. His hands simultaneously gripped the Juzi sword and the Chijian sword, 2 sword maidens. Every inch of Guhan's flesh and every cell seemed to tremble slightly, like a volcano that could erupt at any time. This was Guhan's final trump card. The powerful basic attributes of the Juzi sword and the Chijian sword merged into one under the effect of the yin-yang sword secret art. After the yin-yang sword secret art entered the dual sword realm, Guhan could simultaneously use two sword maidens of the same realm with the same basic attributes added together. Right now, Guhan had two close-fitting shields with doubled energy on the surface of his body. Whether it was attack power, defense power, or reaction speed, they all increased by 4 times. In addition, the Green Lotus White Root body increased his body control by 100 times. Purely in terms of reaction speed, Guhan was equivalent to an increase of 400 times. Green Lotus White Root body plus Yin-Yang sword secret art dual sword realm. This was currently the strongest fighting stance that Guhan could display. At the same time, it was also the first time that Guhan had displayed this kind of fighting stance. In previous battles, even when facing the extremely terrifying danger of Yuzhang City, Guhan had never displayed this kind of fighting stance, although in that battle, it was useless for Guhan, who was only at the level of a sword, to display this kind of stance. If you're not going to speak, then die. Gilgamesh released another obedience arrow, but this arrow had not left the bowstring. The moment Gilgamesh's fingers loosened slightly, Guhan, who was standing in the same place, leapt up from his original position like a lion that had smelled blood. Not only did this leap avoid the obedience arrow, he also took advantage of the moment Gilgamesh froze after shooting the arrow to successfully sneak up to Gilgamesh's side. Without holding back, he left another wound in the gap of his obedience holy cloth. This was the effect of the Green Lotus White Root body and Yin-Yang sword secret art increasing his reaction speed by 400 times. This allowed Guhan to successfully see the trajectory of Gilgamesh's obedience arrow, and thus perfectly avoid the attack. Moreover, he even had time to launch a counterattack. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Another 3 obedience arrows missed. Guhan seemed to have found a way to deal with Gilgamesh, but Guhan himself knew in his heart that this was not a long-term plan. I'm not playing anymore. Let's see how long you can last. Suddenly, Gilgamesh put down the golden bow and arrow he spoke of. At the same time, he opened a void gate, and his whole body once again entered the void. Seeing Gilgamesh's strategic retreat, Guhan understood that his weakness had been discovered by Gilgamesh, and that was that he could not maintain this strongest stance for a long time. Using Green Lotus White Root body alone was fine, and using Yin-Yang sword secret art alone was also fine. Guhan's body could barely hold on for a while. However, when these two abilities were used at the same time, the burden on Guhan's body became extremely terrifying, especially on the cells in Guhan's body. This strongest stance was extremely harmful to the human body's cells, and Guhan could at most not exceed 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, all the cells in his body would completely collapse. After Gilgamesh deliberately hid in the void for a while, Guhan discovered that almost all the cells in his body were showing signs of collapse. Guhan knew in his heart that he could no longer maintain his strongest stance. If he insisted on maintaining it, most of the cells in his body would probably collapse. Without any other choice, Guhan could only helplessly cancel Green Lotus White Root body and Yin-Yang sword secret art, and then his whole body went limp and fell to the ground. Chapter 919. You're not bad. Seeing Ji Han fall to the ground, Gilgamesh finally stood out from the void. Looking at the weak enemy in front of him, Gilgamesh nodded approvingly. To be able to force me to retreat, this can already be the greatest and last pride of your life. I will give you a hero's death. Gilgamesh materialized the golden bow and obedient arrow again and aimed at Guhan's head. Should I use this now? Ji Han could not help but pinch the jade ring on his finger. Ji Han only needed to pinch the jade ring lightly, and he would be able to return to the trial formation of Changyang Mountain with the help of the power left behind by Yi Qing. This was Guhan's last resort. Although Guhan was confident he could save his life with the help of the Jasper ring, Gilgamesh had completely lost his restraint. However, Gilgamesh had completely lost his restraints. Once he left the spatial rift, the entire heavenly cycle stellar array would probably be destroyed. Should I hold on a little longer? Guhan thought to himself as he touched the jasper ring. Guhan still had more than 20,000 quarks left. He could withstand around 7 obedient arrows, which meant he could buy himself another 40 seconds. However, Guhan would need to use all his remaining sword essence to buy himself another 40 seconds. From then on, Guhan would have to return to the state of an ancient sword wielder and start from scratch again. However, he could only buy himself another 40 seconds. If Liuyan Ling could make it there in the next 40 seconds, it would be worth it even if Guhan used up all his sword essence. If Liuyan Ling could not make it in time, Guhan would only be wasting his time. As a matter of fact, according to Guhan's calculations, Liuyan Ling would need at least 24 minutes to get there. 30 seconds versus 24 minutes was an obvious answer. Guhan's best choice was to activate the Jasper Ring and escape to Changyang Mountain's trial formation while he still had more than 20,000 quarks left to save his life. However, when Guhan was about to escape, the severed head of the 1000-do Isuzu bell appeared in front of Guhan again. If Guhan had not chosen to give up on the 1000-do Isuzu bell because of absolute benefits, perhaps Guhan would still be suppressed by the seal. In that case, Gilgamesh would definitely be able to delay Liuyan Ling's arrival. Now, Guhan seemed to be faced with the same choice. Considering absolute benefits, Guhan should escape immediately. However, if Guhan escaped, the entire Ju-Tien Star battle formation would be doomed to shatter. If Guhan held on for another 40 seconds, would a miracle happen? Guhan was still hesitating, but Gilgamesh did not. The next arrow, the obedient arrow, accurately hit Guhan, who had completely lost his strength. Guhan's personal shield kept rippling, and another 3,000 quarks of sword essence disappeared. Guhan's sword essence limit was now only slightly more than 19,000 points. Oh. Have you completely given up resisting? I like this kind of good boy. Gilgamesh smiled slightly, but his hands did not stop moving. The invisible obedient arrow began to condense again. Only 5 seconds later, the second obedient arrow once again took a picture of Guhan's body. 16,000 quarks. 13,000 quarks. The sword essence limit in Guhan's body continued to drop, and soon, there were only more than 13,000 quarks of sword essence left. It had reached an extremely dangerous point. Soon, the sword essence limit in Guhan's body would fall below 10,000 quarks. Guhan might not even be able to use his famed sword-class sword mistress. I'd better go back. It's not shameful to escape now. Guhan squeezed the Jasper ring in his hand. In just a second, he had made up his mind countless times to trigger the power in the Jasper ring, but in the end, he was stopped by an invisible force. It was as if it was telling Guhan that perseverance was victory. 10,000 quarks. Guhan's body once again suffered the attack of the obedient arrow. With just one more arrow, Guhan would immediately fall to the sword essence level of a treasured sword-class sword wielder. That would undoubtedly be an earth-shattering result. Damn it, let's go. Where did my rationality go? Guhan bit his tongue hard and smiled. Blood with a slightly fishy smell immediately filled Guhan's mouth, and it also made Guhan's long-lost rationality return to his mind. This time, Guhan had made up his mind. He could not let the upper limit of his sword essence continue to fall like this. He had to retreat. He had already done his best for Shanhai Pass. However, just as Guhan was about to leave, the tightly shut door was suddenly kicked open by someone. Gilgamesh, who was about to use the obedient arrow, and Guhan, who was about to escape, stopped in their tracks. Then, they saw the awe-inspiring Liuyan Ling barge in with Ashima, who had a look of disdain on her face. You're not dead yet. Seeing Guhan lying on the ground, Liuyan Ling's tense face finally revealed a happy smile. Then, this smile was quickly hidden by Liuyan Ling. She turned to look at Gilgamesh with a calm and murderous expression. Gilgamesh, my Liuyan clan has finally found you. Today is the day you die. Just like how she had appeared, Liuyan Ling spoke in the same awe-inspiring manner as Ling. It was as if Gilgamesh was just a small monster that could be easily killed by Liuyan Ling. Who are you? Such arrogance at such a young age. Gilgamesh narrowed his eyes. He had no idea where the little girl in front of him got the confidence to speak to him like this. Let me introduce myself. I am Lionian Ling of the Lionian clan. Today, I represent the Lionian clan and our ancestor, Lord Kunzu, to kill you, you dog, Lionian Ling said proudly. The feud between the Lionian clan and Gilgamesh had never stopped. Ever since she was very young, Lionian Ling had loved listening to the stories of her ancestor. Naturally, Lionian Ling was very familiar with the mysterious Yuan Ku who had almost killed her ancestor's good friends. Other humans might not know who this Yuan Ku was, but as the direct descendant of the Lionian clan, how could Lionian Ling not know who this damned Yuan Ku was? Moreover, the Lionian clan had always had a rule that if their descendants had the chance to find Gilgamesh, they must do their best to kill this Yuan Ku and make up for the regret that Kunzu could not come down all those years ago. Therefore, when Lionian Ling heard the news of Gilgamesh's appearance, she used some extremely precious single-use items to teleport from the Sunstar garrison to the coordinates that Ashima had given her. Then, she followed Ashima into the Radiant amusement park without hesitation and used another single-use item to teleport outside the sealed grounds. Of course, Lionian Ling would only admit that she had used so many precious items to kill Gilgamesh. She would never admit that this had anything to do with Guhan. Yes, definitely not. You're the descendant of Fleeting Time Calendar. Gilgamesh was clearly shocked. It's been a few hundred years. Haven't the descendants of that fellow from Fleeting Time Calendar died out yet? Me. Before we kill you to avenge our ancestors, the Lionian clan will not die out, Lionian Ling said proudly. You little brat, what gives you the confidence to say that you're so sure that you can take me down? Gilgamesh could not help but feel a little guilty when he saw Lionian Ling's expression as she spoke. Although he was mighty in front of Guhan and Ling, in front of Lionian Ling, it was as if he had eaten a black chicken and white phoenix pill, becoming timid. This was mainly because he had suffered too many losses at the hands of Kunzu back then. Now that he saw Kunzu's descendant, he felt that Kunzu would suddenly jump out and beat him up. Ling, don't waste time with him. Use the 3-meter goddess. There are 300,000 humans outside, it's enough for you to kill this Gilgamesh 10 times over. Guhan whispered to Lionian Ling. Guhan naturally knew where Lionian Ling's confidence came from. It was the human pathsword goddess's 3-meter goddess that even Guhan was jealous of. As a human pathsword goddess, as long as there were enough humans, the human pathsword goddess would possess nearly endless power. Although this might consume a lot of the human's lifespan, which was too much for the already bitter humans in the Radiant City, there was no other way. After all, they could not just watch as Gilgamesh killed him and Lionian Ling. Human pathsword goddess? What the hell is that? After all, Gilgamesh had been away from the mainstream world for too long. The human pathsword goddess only appeared after he was sealed, so Gilgamesh did not know the terror of the human pathsword goddess. Otherwise, if a flood-level Yuan Ku heard that the human pathsword goddess was in Lionian Ling's hands and that there were 300,000 human lifespan that could be squandered by the human pathsword goddess, this flood-level Yuan Ku would definitely choose to retreat immediately. Only a fool would fight to the death with a human pathsword goddess. Unfortunately, Gilgamesh did not know this, so he only showed a puzzled expression and did not show any fear towards the 3-meter goddess. No. This sinner's life is not worth 300,000 human lifespan. Unexpectedly, Lionian Ling directly refused Guhan's suggestion to use the human pathsword goddess, and instead took out a card from her dimensional pocket. That's right, this was an exquisitely crafted card similar to those in card games. However, the character on the card was not a two-dimensional portrait, but a real photo. It was a character that Ji Han looked familiar to him. Fleeting Year Calendar. He did not expect Gilgamesh to be the first to recognize the character on this card, but this was not surprising. After all, the two had been entangled for a lifetime, so of course Gilgamesh could recognize his old enemy at a glance. Gilgamesh, let the unfinished battle from 900 years ago end today. The ancestor has been waiting for you for many years. Lionian Ling smiled slightly, and the card in her hand instantly incinerated. Then, an illusory shadow floated out of the card, and finally gathered into a handsome figure in white robes. Lord Kunzu. Seeing this figure, Guhan could not help but lower his head. This was indeed Kunzu's fleeting year calendar. He did not expect Kinzu to bear such a grudge against Gilgamesh that he deliberately left his sword mark and soul seal to destroy Gilgamesh. Chapter 920. The sword scar soul imprint was a method that only Gendi could use. It was to leave
No
a
matter
spiritual
how much
imprint
Gilgamesh
on something
tried to
that
touch
Gendi
the void
often used.
the void
did not
then,
give Gilgamesh
when
any
faced with a
response.
certain situation,
It was as if
it
the
could
void
activate
no
the
longer
sword
existed.
scar soul imprint
Gilgamesh
that Gendi
knew
left
that
behind.
the fleeting year
It
calendar's
could
sword
activate
soul
the image
had
of
sealed off
Gendi.
the entire
It had
void.
10% of
He could
Gendi's
no
strength.
longer escape through
It was
the
a
void
life-saving
gate.
artifact
Enough with
that
the
every
nonsense
Gendi
left
old
behind
G.
for their descendants.
Let's settle the score
It could
between
save
us
the entire
today.
family
The
at a
fleeting year
critical
calendar's
moment.
sword soul
It was a
raised the
pity
sword
that
in
the
his
sword
hand.
scar soul
You gave me a
imprint
sword
consumed
strike in Wuhan
Gendi's own
City that
soul,
caused me to be
depending
unable
on
to live in
Gendi's
peace.
strength.
The number of souls
I'm
that could be
returning
cut
this
off
sword
to make
strike
the
to
sword
you.
scar soul
If you can
imprint
withstand
varied.
this strike
An
of mine,
ordinary
then the
Gendi
score
could leave
between us
behind
will be
3
settled,
sword scar
and my
soul
sword
imprints
soul
at
will
most.
immediately dissipate.
The powerful
But
Gendi
if you
could
can't
leave
withstand
behind
this
5.
strike,
As
then
for the
please
most
come
powerful
find me in the
Kinzu,
dimensional
it was said
space.
that he could
A
leave
strike.
behind 12 sword
Gilgamesh's
scar soul
expression
imprints.
turned into one
After
of anger.
Kinzu's death,
Little
the
fleeting
Liu
time,
family
I
had
admit
already
that I've
used
lost.
7 sword
I'm
scar
no
soul
match for
imprints
you.
in the face of
But
the
you
various
think you can
dangers of the
defeat me,
human race.
the hero King
In other
Gilgamesh,
words, with a
the
single
Liu
strike,
family should
you
still have
think too
5
highly
sword
of
scar soul
yourself.
imprints left
Even
behind.
the so-called second
These
you,
5 sword
shrouding
scar
heaven
soul
Giza,
imprints left
could not
behind by
hurt me with a
Kinzu were
single
all
strike,
extremely
much
important
less kill me.
treasures.
Each
Gilgamesh
of them was
spat out
priceless
another
and could
shocking
even
secret.
save the fate of the
Who would
human
have
race
thought
at
that
a
he had
critical
actually
moment.
fought against the
Previously,
heaven-shrouding sword
every
emperor
time
back in the
Kinzu
day,
used the sword
but he had
scar
called
soul
heaven-shrouding
imprint, it
sword
was to
emperor
deal
an
with
old
the flood
man.
grade Yuan
Could it
Ku.
be that the
What a
heaven-shrouding
huge
sword
loss.
emperor he had
Guhan
met
looked
was
at
Yi
the
Ching's
King's
father?
sword scar soul
Then you
and
can
said
give it a
regretfully,
try.
the sword
As long
scar
as you
soul
can
imprint
withstand
is
a
too
strike
precious.
from me, my
It
sword
can't be
soul will
used in this
immediately
kind of
disappear,
place.
and I will have
Using the
nothing to do
3 feet
with you.
goddess would
Although
also be
Guhan
enough
could
to
not
kill
see
this fellow.
Kinzu's expression
It's
from
fine.
behind,
Guhan
Guhan
believed
shook
that
her
Kinzu's
head and said
expression
very
was one of
seriously,
disdain. This
as
is
if
something that
Gilgamesh
the
was
old
a pile of
ancestor
dog shit
specially
by the side
instructed
of the
us to
road.
do.
You
If
said
the
it
descendants
yourself.
of the Liu
As long as I
family
can
have the
withstand
chance
a
to see
strike
this
from
fellow
you,
again,
we'll be
they
even.
must use this
Gilgamesh
sword
couldn't
scar
wait
imprint.
to confirm with the
The
sword
old
master,
ancestor said
as if
that
he had
must
picked up
kill
a
this
pie
fellow
falling
with his
from
own
the
hands.
sky.
Since
Just how deep
Gilgamesh,
is the
who had the
enmity
pride of a
between
king,
Kinzu
could
and
say such
Gilgamesh?
weak words,
It's
it could
actually
be
this
seen how
deep.
terrifying the sword
Guhan was
master was in
speechless.
Gilgamesh's heart.
Since the fleeting year
That's right.
calendar had
Have you
purposely left
forgotten
behind
that
a
I
sword
always
mark to
keep
deal
my
with
word?
Gilgamesh,
There
Kinzu
was
said
nothing he could do
firmly,
about it.
"Good. As long
Little
as Kinzu
Kinzu
was
time,
happy,
you're getting
everything
more
was
and more
fine."
arrogant.
While Guhan
Then
and
I,
Liu Ling
Gilgamesh,
were chatting
will
leisurely,
take a strike from
Gilgamesh,
you.
on the other
Gilgamesh
hand,
said,
was not so
very
relaxed.
well.
As
When
soon
he
as he
saw
finished
Kinzu's
speaking,
sword soul,
the fleeting year
Gilgamesh
calendar's
rolled his
sword
eyes
soul
and
raised
secretly
the sword
opened
in
the
his
void
hand
gate
and slashed
trying to
down like a
escape into the
woodcutter
void.
chopping firewood.
Oh gee,
It was
aren't
such
we
a
going to
simple
catch up?
slash, but it
Kinzu's
caused
sword
Guhan's
soul
eyes
buzzed,
to
and
almost
the
pop
opened
out of
void
their
door
sockets.
instantly closed,
Guhan could
not
see
giving
countless
Gilgamesh
sword
any
techniques
chance to escape.
fused into the slash.
Little fleeting
But when
time,
Guhan tried
I
to
didn't
distinguish
expect
them,
to see you
all
here.
of them
As
disappeared
Gilgamesh
without a trace,
spoke,
leaving
he
only
secretly
the
swiped
slash.
his finger to the
If
side,
I were to face
still
this
trying
sword,
to open a new void
Gu
gate.
Han couldn't help
But something
put
that
himself
made
on the
Gilgamesh
opposite
despair
side of the sword
happened.
master. Then, he imagined how he would face this sword if he were Gilgamesh. But when Guhan began to imagine this, he could not help but break out in a cold sweat. This was because Guhan discovered to his horror that he could not avoid the slash no matter what he did. He could not even block the slash, and could only stand there and take the blow. This is definitely not an ordinary slash. The sweating Guhan muttered to himself, "This is the most primitive and quintessential slash in the world. This slash has already surpassed the limits of my imagination. Is this really a slash that a human can use? Is it really that exaggerated?" Hearing Guhan's words, Liu Ling could not help but roll her eyes at Guhan. "Isn't this our clan's harmonious stream of flowing goblets? This is a basic slash that every descendant of the fleeting time clan must learn. How can it be as powerful as you say? You're saying that this is a basic slash?" Guhan was at a loss. Such a powerful slash was only a basic slash. Then just how powerful was Liu Ling's swordsmanship? Then why did he feel that Liu Ling's swordsmanship was not as good as his? In an instant, Guhan suddenly felt as if his skin had been pricked by a needle. Turning his head, he discovered that Kinzu's sword spirit was actually looking at him. Within those empty and illusory eyes, Guhan seemed to be able to see something profound. "Fleeting time calendar, you've won." Suddenly, Gilgamesh, who had not spoken a single word since fleeting time calendar used the harmonious stream of flowing goblets, revealed an expression of relief. Then, in that instant, Gilgamesh's corpse began to slowly disintegrate like a sand sculpture. The ashes of his body slowly piled up on the ground like an hourglass, forming a small mound of sand that looked like a grave from afar. Gilgamesh had died just like that. He had died so simply under Liuanian Ling's slash. Gilgamesh, who had once toyed with Guhan like a fool when he was in his strongest state, had died just like that. There was not a single trace of excitement as he quietly turned into a mound of sand. When Gilgamesh's entire body had turned into a mound of killing intent, a round golden ball slowly floated out of the mound of sand. Is this Gilgamesh's heroic soul? It seems like Gilgamesh is really dead. Seeing this golden ball, Liuanian Ling couldn't help but mutter to herself. The heroic soul corresponded to the godhead, and it was something that Yuan Ku, who was above the universe realm, would definitely have. It was the final core of Yuan Ku's power. Yuan Ku, who was a god, had a godhead in his body. It was just like the three Egyptian gods, Medusa, Loki, and the other gods who had died in front of Guhan. As for Yuan Ku, who wasn't a god or above the universe realm, the thing in his body was called a heroic soul. Its function was similar to a godhead, but it was different in nature. A godhead appeared by stealing the power of heaven and earth, but a heroic soul was condensed from one's own power. Therefore, Yuan Ku, who had a heroic soul, was usually stronger than a god of the same rank. In the face of Gilgamesh's heroic soul, Yuan had two choices. One was to shatter Gilgamesh's heroic soul, and then a dimensional vortex would appear and take Gilgamesh out of this world. Then, Guhan would be able to absorb enough sword essence from the dimensional vortex. The second was to keep this heroic soul. There were many uses for a heroic soul, and it was a very precious material. If Guhan gave this heroic soul to a base city, he would probably be able to exchange it for a full set of materials for a famed sword maiden. This was much more cost-effective than sword essence. Therefore, just as Guhan was about to pick up the heroic soul, a sword light flashed, and Gilgamesh's heroic soul was completely shattered. At the same time, a dimensional vortex appeared. Yuan, who was about to pick up the heroic soul, was speechless. Because the one who chopped the heroic soul was none other than the sword ancestor's sword soul. Originally, Gilgamesh was killed by the sword ancestor. Yuan did not have the face to accuse the sword ancestor of not knowing how to cherish treasures. Only then can our grudge be considered resolved. Can you forgive an old man like me for my selfishness? The fleeting year calendar said faintly. There was nothing wrong with what the fleeting year calendar said, but who was the fleeting year calendar saying this to? Was it to Liuanian Ling, or was it to Guhan? Chapter 921. After Gilgamesh's heroic soul was destroyed by Khonsu's sword, the specks of golden starlight within the heroic soul rose like smoke and disappeared into the sealed space. At the same time, the dimensional vortex grew to its largest size. Gilgamesh's level was too high, so the dimensional vortex grew to the size of a car. This was the largest dimensional vortex that Guhan had ever seen because of a certain Yuan Ku. The larger the dimensional vortex, the more sword essences it could absorb. Based on the size of this dimensional vortex, there were at least 100,000 quarks of sword essences in it. Go. Don't waste the sword essence. It's useless to me right now, Fleeting Calendar said to Fleeting Time Lin and Yuan, who were standing beside him. Fleeting Time placed his 3-foot sword into the dimensional vortex and began to absorb the sword essence in the dimensional vortex. Guhan hesitated. After all, Gilgamesh was killed with Khonsu's help. Guhan was simply saved by the Fleeting family. Guhan did not have the face to share the Fleeting family's spoils of war. Moreover, when Guhan saw Fleeting Calendar's sword soul, he felt guilty for no reason. After all, Guhan had mercilessly stabbed Khonsu. Khonsu naturally did not know about it, but Guhan remembered it in his heart. Go. Gilgamesh will have at least 500,000 quarks of sword essence after his death. Ling won't be able to use that much by herself. Don't waste it. Khonsu suddenly turned to speak to Guhan as if he had seen through Guhan's thoughts. He gestured to Guhan that he could also absorb the sword essence in the dimensional vortex. Since Khonsu had spoken, Guhan was not an unreasonable person. He drew his sword of qi and stabbed it into the dimensional vortex with Liuanian Ling full. It's full. A few seconds after the chi sword was inserted into the 3-foot sword, Liuyan Ling pulled it out, indicating that the 3-foot sword had absorbed enough sword essence and couldn't absorb any more. Previously, it was said that the sword elements absorbed by the sword lady from the dimensional vortex had an upper limit. At most, the sword lady could only absorb 20 times the amount of sword essence needed to synchronize her body. In other words, synchronizing a famous sword maiden required at least 10,000 quarks of sword essences, so a famous sword maiden could only absorb 200,000 quarks of sword essences at most. Although the 1-foot sword was the best famed sword, it couldn't escape the restrictions of this rule. Therefore, after the 1-foot sword absorbed 200,000 quarks of sword essence from the dimensional vortex after Gilgamesh's death, it couldn't absorb another quark of sword essence. Liuyan Ling could only put away her 1-foot sword. As half a flood-grade Yuan Ku, the dimensional vortex after Gilgamesh's death should have at least 500,000 quarks of sword essence, just as Kunzu had said. Guhan's sword of Qi and Liuyan Ling's 1-foot sword had an upper limit of 200,000 quarks of sword essence. There were still more than 100,000 quarks of sword essence left in the dimensional vortex. When the dimensional vortex closed, the sword essence would be wasted. At the thought of this, Guhan said to Ashima, who had been watching the show from the side, "Come in and absorb the sword essence too. Don't waste it. Do I have a share too?" Ashima jumped happily to the other side of Guhan and clamped Guhan on both sides with Liuyan Ling. Then, she pulled out her prophet's sword and stabbed it into the dimensional vortex to share the rich spoils of war. On the other side, the sword of Qi was frantically devouring the sword essence in the entire dimensional vortex. Soon, it quietly told Guhan through the sword mark that it had absorbed 200,000 quarks of sword essence. Upon hearing this, Guhan was about to put away the sword of Qi, but the sword of Qi immediately added, "Don't be in such a hurry to put me away. I feel that I can still absorb some more sword essence." Guhan blinked and then decisively stopped the action of putting away the sword of Qi. He even sent the sword of Qi into the dimensional vortex so that the sword of Qi could have a wider contact with the dimensional vortex so that it could absorb more sword essence. At this time, the dimensional vortex had passed its maximum radius and began to gradually shrink. Soon, it would close. "How much sword essence have you absorbed now, Chidian?" Guhan quietly asked the sword of Qi through the sword mark. 40 W. The sword of Qi's answer made Guhan a little excited. The sword of Qi had actually absorbed 400,000 quarks of sword essence, which was twice the result of a normal sword maiden. Moreover, this result had not reached the upper limit of the sword of Qi. It seemed that the sword of Qi could absorb more sword essence. "I'm full too." A second later, Ashima put away the sword of Qi in satisfaction. This meant that Ashima had also absorbed 200,000 quarks of sword essence. In this way, Guhan and the other two had absorbed 800,000 quarks of sword essence from the dimensional vortex caused by Gilgamesh's death. This was not the final number. The sword of Qi was still continuously absorbing the sword essence in the dimensional vortex. "Strange. You haven't absorbed enough yet." Ashma excitedly retracted her prophet's sword and was surprised to discover that Guhan was still absorbing the sword elements in the dimensional vortex. Guhan had clearly started absorbing the sword elements in the dimensional vortex a second earlier than him. Logically speaking, he should have finished absorbing faster than him. Why hadn't he reached the upper limit of 200,000? It's like this. Just now, my sword maiden was seriously injured in the battle with Gilgamesh. She hasn't fully recovered yet, so it's only natural that she'll take a longer time to absorb the sword essence. Guhan's explanation was flawless, and the sword maiden did indeed have a setting where her absorption of sword essence would slow down after being injured. Before Liuyan Ling and Ashima arrived, Guhan had been fighting Gilgamesh alone, so it was only natural that his sword mistress would be injured. However, after taking a look at the sword mistress in Guhan's hand, Ashma couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Although the sword mistress in Guhan's hand was identical to the one Ashma had seen before, she clearly remembered that it was a black sword mistress. Why was it golden now? Could it be that Guhan's sword mistress will automatically change color after being injured? Ashma made a random guess and didn't take it to heart. She would never have guessed that Guhan would have two sword mistresses. The dimensional vortex was still shrinking, but the starting point sword's absorption of sword elements had yet to reach its upper limit. 500,000. 600,000. 700,000. When the dimensional vortex finally closed, Ji Han unwillingly pulled out the starting point sword. The starting point sword had absorbed a total of 850,000 quarks of sword essences. This was still not the upper limit of the sword essences that the starting point sword could absorb. Similarly, the starting point sword still hadn't completely absorbed the sword elements in the dimensional vortex. One Gilgamesh could actually bring more than 1,600,000 quarks of sword elements. This was already close to the sword elements that a dead flood-level Yuan Ku could bring. One had to know that a flood-level Yuan Ku could usually bring about 2,800,000 to 5 million quarks of sword elements. However, this was equivalent to the sword elements that an Emperor sword-level sword wielder could bring. At the same time, this also meant that when all the sword elements in the starting point sword were transferred to Guhan, according to the ratio of about 50%, Guhan could get 430,000 quarks of sword elements. This not only made up for the 30,000 quarks of sword elements that Guhan had lost, but Guhan also earned 400,000 quarks of sword elements. At this time, as long as Guhan left Shanhai Pass, he could directly attack a spirit sword-level sword wielder. Your sword lady's injury must be very serious. Seeing that Guhan only pulled out his sword lady the moment the dimensional vortex disappeared with a regretful expression on his face, Ashima instinctively thought that the starting point sword was too seriously injured, so it hadn't absorbed the upper limit of 200,000 quarks of sword elements. It's okay. I'm already satisfied to be able to save my life. It's enough that the sword elements can make up for what I lost. Guhan had an expression of rejoicing and helplessness, as if he really hadn't absorbed 20 quarks of sword elements. Still pretending to be innocent after getting a bargain, Kanzu's sword spirit, who had been watching silently from the side, suddenly said, scaring Guhan so much that he shivered. What did Kanzu mean by this? Could it be that he had already seen through the extraordinariness of the starting point sword and knew that Guhan had absorbed a total of 850,000 quarks of sword elements? Thinking about it carefully, this didn't seem to be strange at all. After all, the person next to Guhan was Kanzu. As the sword spirit of the most powerful sword wielder in human history, it wasn't surprising that he could see through the extraordinariness of the starting point sword at a glance. Fortunately, Kanzu didn't go too far and didn't delve into the issue of the starting point sword with Guhan. Instead, he carefully looked at the three juniors in front of him with a smile on his face. Then, he let out a long sigh, walked in front of Ashima, and touched her head. Although I don't know why a human like you would appear in this world, and I didn't know that there would be such a strange sword lady in the future, I can see that your future is destined to be full of difficulties and pain, but I hope you can remember one thing, and that is that you are ultimately a human. You must put the interests of humans first, and don't put the cart before the horse and do something that will be too late for regret. Kanzu said as he touched Ashima's head like a charlatan. Liunian Ling was a little baffled by her ancestor's words, but Guhan understood it all. It was obvious that the great Kanzu had seen through the truth of Ashima's identity. He knew that Ashima wasn't a real human, but a hybrid between a human and Yuan Ku. That was why he said things like, I don't know why a human like you would appear in this world. At the same time, he also reminded Ashima to remember her identity as a human and not to betray it. Although Kanzu told Ashima not to do so, after listening to Kanzu's words, Guhan had a feeling that Ashima would betray humans sooner or later. Chapter 922. Father. The black tortoise was wrong. The black tortoise shouldn't have blamed you wrongly. The person who rushed in was the black tortoise, and he apologized to Guhan the moment he opened his mouth. This surprised Guhan. How did the black tortoise, who had said all sorts of harsh words to Guhan, apologize to Guhan so quickly? What happened outside the battlefield? I will remember Senior Kanzu's words. I will fight for the future of humanity in this life, Guhan immediately said passionately. However, he changed the topic and asked curiously, Senior Kanzu, didn't I hear that the fragments of consciousness exist independently? Even the original body cannot know what the fragment experienced before retrieving it. Senior, you've just been released from the sword scar soul seal. How do you know what the other fragment experienced? Hearing Kanzu's words, Guhan suddenly raised his head and looked at Kanzu in disbelief. What did he just say? What did he mean by snatching the sword maiden from his corpse? Could it be? The Liu family did not have it hard. They are the #1 family in the human world and have enjoyed the privilege of 1,000 years. They have a super foundation that even an entire base city cannot have. If the descendants of the Liu family have it hard, then everyone else in the world has it hard. Guhan thought to himself. However, he naturally could not say the truth in front of Kanzu. Well, Guhan had pretty much guessed his new identity in just a few words. Ha! Who is she referring to? Guhan was at a loss over Kanzu's words. Suddenly, in the space where time had stopped, a figure swaying left and right hurriedly rushed into Guhan's arms. Could it be that the fragments of human consciousness could also exist in the game? Didn't that mean that the person who completed the quest with Guhan in the dungeon was not a simple NPC, but a fragment of Kanzu's consciousness? You don't need to know that. Just think of it as my special ability. Kanzu avoided this topic. It seemed like he did not want to tell the truth. He then changed the topic. I thought that the humans who lost their balance were going to die. I didn't think that there would always be a way out. The ruler allowed you to descend into this world. Our world finally has a chance of survival. That's impossible. You're just a blade spirit, and it happened in a dungeon. How could you possibly know that? Ji Han's expression was like he had seen a ghost. At the same time, he looked around. Fleeting Time Ling and Ashima stood there without moving an inch. Their faces were expressionless, as if they were statues. Ancestor, grandchild, Liuyan Ling, is the 27th generation descendant of grandchild. I didn't think that I would have the chance to see grandchild with my own eyes. Grandchild, ancesty, grandchild, grandchild. In Liuyan Ling's heart, her grandchild was an absolute legend. He was an existence that she looked up to. How could this be? Kanzu let go of his hand on the black tortoise's shoulder and took a few steps back. Unfortunately, this admiration was soon shattered. This was because Kanzu asked a question that made Liuyan Ling want to vomit blood. Are you really my bloodline descendant? It's been passed down for 27 generations. It's inevitable that one of my unfilial descendants was made a cuckold. Don't doubt it. I do know a little bit of the truth. Kanzu showed his thumb and index finger, which were about the size of a bottle cap. But I only know a little bit of the truth. As for what happened to your sword after it left my body, I don't know. Liuyan Ling was speaking the truth. Since ancient times, the billion sword technique could only be used by those with the bloodline of the Liuyan family. Even if others were given the billion sword technique manual, they would not be able to learn it even if they practiced it for decades. Don't worry. I know that you don't want others to know these secrets, so you used a little trick to stop time in this space. Kanzu said calmly, as if stopping time was really just a trick. It wasn't at first, but it was later, Kanzu said indifferently. It was just a simple NPC. Later, when the NPC was about to die, the consciousness fragment realized that something was wrong. So, it possessed the corpse and witnessed the end of the dungeon. No, not at all. Kanzu shook his head. Although it's really bad of a person to do this, I've checked your information. It's not easy for you to reach this stage. Humans also need a talent like you. Even if I don't like you, I can't destroy a talent like you. If you really feel guilty towards me, then use all your guilt to fight for humans. What do you think? Time. Space. I understand. On the other side, the confused sword master seemed to understand something. He raised his head and looked around the entire sealed space. His face suddenly showed an ecstatic expression. Ancestor, what kind of joke are you talking about? Liuyan Ling's face was red. It was unknown whether it was from embarrassment or anger. If there's a problem with my bloodline, how can I use the billion sword technique of the Liuyan family? Finally, you. Kanzu finally looked at Guhan. Daddy. What daddy? Black Tortoise. Why do you call him daddy? Kanzu shook Gu Black Tortoise's body with a dumbfounded expression. He called out Black Tortoise's name intimately, as if he had known Gu Black Tortoise for a long time. As for how I know about this, there's no harm in telling you. Don't think that just because a sword maiden can leave a fragment of her consciousness in a dungeon, humans can't leave a fragment of their consciousness in a dungeon. Kanzu's words were like a bolt from the blue that struck Guhan's mind, messing up Guhan's worldview and common sense. All right, I was just joking. Kanzu rubbed the head of his 27th generation granddaughter, and then said with a sigh, it's been hard on all of you. For 1,000 years, you've been fighting for humans. You've carried out my will. This is good. This is what my descendants should do. After 1,000 years, it's finally time for us to meet. Kanzu stared at Guhan, and then turned his gaze to the sword of Qi in Guhan's hand. He smiled slightly. I didn't expect this sword maiden, who was snatched from my corpse, to grow to this stage. We humans are lucky. At the same time, the other properties in the space were completely still. Even the dust was fixed in place and did not move. In the entire space, there was nothing that could move except for Guhan and Kanzu's sword souls. Oh, and then there's you. By the way, which generation are you, my descendant? Kanzu's sword soul turned his gaze to his true descendant, Liuonian Ling. He looked at Liuonian Ling with interest, and then asked, Gu Black Tortoise? Why did you suddenly appear here? How did you appear? Because time had stopped, Liuonian Ling couldn't understand when Gu Xuanwu appeared. What? Why do I have to call him daddy? He's my daddy, what's wrong with me calling him daddy? Gu Xuanwu said in confusion. Just as Guhan was puzzled by this, his back was suddenly grabbed by a hand, and another hand grabbed Gu Xuanwu's shoulder. Then, the hand forcibly separated Guhan and Gu Xuanwu, and threw Guhan away like a piece of trash. This game is really a paradise for consciousness fragments. A consciousness fragment that was supposed to disappear after appearing for a short period of time in the real world can actually live forever in the game. That's why my consciousness fragment lived like an NPC in the game for 200 years. Back then, I personally witnessed Jiyu Jin's transformation from a naive boy to a scoundrel sword emperor. I even transformed into a player and fought alongside him for more than 20 years. I feel like I've regained some of my youth. So, what exactly did this sword ancestor understand? Not only did Liuonian Ling want to vomit blood at Kanzu's words, even Guhan couldn't help but laugh. Speaking of which, Kanzu's worries weren't wrong. After all, 27 generations of 1,000 years had passed, and it was inevitable that a few unlucky children would be cuckolded, and then become fathers. This was a very possible thing. Perhaps Fleeting Time Calendar's bloodline would be messed up because of this. Leveler? Wasn't that what the mysterious Fleeting Maple had said before? That's right, according to Fleeting Maple, Fleeting Time Calendar was the leveler of this world. Did that mean that the leveler that Kanzu was referring to was him disappearing into another dimension? Then could it be further inferred that he would become the successor of the Sword Ancestor and become the new leveler of this world? Senior Kanzu, I have another question, and that is, Guhan was about to ask about the Jiyu clan's bloodline, but Fleeting Time Calendar's expression suddenly changed, and he blurted out, "Why is she here? Why is this happening? This doesn't make sense," Kanzu said in a daze. All of a sudden, the entire space began to tremble, and Ashima and Liuonian Ling, who had been motionless, regained their ability to move. "I've sinned." Guhan took a deep breath, and said with a look of remorse, "I'm willing to accept Senior Kanzu's punishment. Actually, the so-called Sword Scar Soul Seal is just a method of cutting off a fragment of one's consciousness and sealing it into something." Kanzu explained slowly, "Other than the 12 Sword Scar Soul Seals that I left behind on the surface, I also left a fragment of my consciousness on a few other small items. 200 years ago, when this game was being built, it lacked an important component. Thus, my adorable descendants contributed a fragment of my consciousness to the game, and it became the core component of the game. That fragment of my consciousness naturally entered the game. What are you doing? You actually dared to throw my father out, You must be that Gilgamesh, I will kill you. Seeing Ji Han being thrown out, Ji Xuanwu immediately became angry and wanted to make a move on the culprit. Chapter 923. Gu Han was about to ask Kunzu for an explanation, but at this time, Kunzu, who was smiling at Gu Han and the others, began to gradually dissipate, and finally turned into nothingness, completely dissipating. This was the fate of the Sword Mark Soul Seal. When the reason for summoning the Sword Mark Soul Seal disappeared, the sword mark itself could not exist for too long, and would eventually return to the world. Unfortunately, Gu Han still had a lot of questions to ask Kunzu, but it was impossible to get an answer. It was just that when he recalled Kunzu's expression when he disappeared, Gu Han faintly felt that it was a little strange. Because after a sudden burst of madness, Kunzu suddenly had a look of enlightenment, as if he had solved a lot of doubts and felt satisfied, as if he had obtained a great wish and left. Could it be that what happened just now had solved a problem that deeply troubled Kunzu? If that was the case, then what would happen? Just now, only Ji Xuanwu rushed in, that was all. Is this your daughter? As the saying goes, before one wave subsides, another wave rises. When Kunzu left Gu Han and the others, Liuyan Ling once again greeted him with a dumbfounded face. She pulled Ji Xuanwu's arm, and could not wait to confirm with Gu Han, this is your daughter. No. Gu Han decisively denied, what a joke, how could he let Liuyan Ling know about this kind of thing? Otherwise, when Gu Han went out, he was afraid that he would become the best news material in the world. Moreover, Gu Han could imagine, once he admitted that Ji Xuanwu was his daughter, how crazy would Liuyan Ling be? In any case, he absolutely could not admit that Ji Xuanwu was his daughter now. Dad. Compared to Gu Han, who would not admit it even if he was beaten to death, Ji Xuanwu did not care at all. She pulled Gu Han's sleeve, with a coquettish expression, as if blaming Gu Han for not being willing to admit it. I'm sorry, my cousin just received the news that her father passed away a few hours ago. So her spirit was stimulated, and I don't know why she started to call me daddy. Gu Han forcibly explained, but Liuyan Ling listened to Gu Han's explanation. The reason was simple. Gu Han had just passed the age of 18. For the Ji Xuanwu to be able to become a sword wielder, it must be above the age of 18. How could an 18-year-old father have an 18-year-old daughter? Therefore, Liuyan Ling chose to believe Gu Han's explanation. Otherwise, Liuyan Ling's worldview would explode. Surnamed Ji, what are you doing? Why won't you admit that I'm your daughter? Don't tell me you don't want me anymore. Ji Xuanwu, who had just lost his mother, seemed to have become extremely sensitive. When she heard that Gu Han wasn't willing to admit that she was his daughter, she immediately exploded. She pointed at Gu Han's nose and scolded him. I want you. I want you. Of course you're my daughter. Helpless, Gu Han could only use voice transmission to explain to the Ji Xuanwu, good daughter, please understand daddy this once. There are some things that really can't be announced. At least before daddy becomes an immortal sword wielder, these things definitely can't be announced. Please forgive daddy this once. Chimpage. Ji Xuanwu seemed to be preparing to say something, when suddenly the entire sealed space started to tremble violently. At the same time, Gu Han realized that everything around him seemed to have started to distort. It was as if Liuyan Ling's body was instantly pulled into the shape of a thin noodle. It was as if he was looking into a mirror, except that the world in the mirror had suddenly appeared in the real world. Rumble. Suddenly, there was a loud noise in the sealed space, and the entrance to the void gate instantly cracked open beside Ji Han's hand. Strange. Why would a void door appear here out of nowhere? Gu Han was instinctively attracted by this entrance. He reached his hand into the void door and prepared to find out what was going on. But he didn't expect that when Gu Han's hand reached into the void door, he felt a piece of cloth that was as slippery as silk. And there seemed to be something wet under the cloth. When his fingers touched it, he felt a moist and sticky liquid, and there was even some messy hair covered under the cloth. Not good. This is my underwear. Gu Han immediately reacted. He turned his head to look at Liuyan Ling's position. He discovered that the exit of the void door just happened to appear between Liuyan Ling's legs. And his hand that had reached into the void door directly reached out from the exit, covering Liuyan Ling's absolute domain. Wasn't this just touching her underwear thoroughly? Pervert. Although Liuyan Ling's reaction was a little slower than Guhan's, she still reacted. She raised her hand and was about to slap Guhan's face. How could Guhan, who had taken advantage of her, dodge? So he stood in place and prepared to silently receive this slap. But unexpectedly, this slap did not hit Guhan's face. You're still touching? Hurry up and take your dirty hand away, or else I'll give you another slap. Liuyan Ling snorted, then said to Guhan with a face full of shame and indignation. Guhan immediately retracted his hand from the void door as if he had been electrocuted. Wait, what did you just say? A strange feeling emerged in Guhan's heart. I told you to take your dirty hand away. Why? Are you addicted to touching? Liuyan Ling said bitterly, at the same time tightly covering her skirt. No. Didn't you just say, or else you'll give me another slap? Guhan repeated what Liuyan Ling had just said. Yes. Shouldn't I slap you? Liuyan Ling clenched her fist as if she was going to slap this shameless guy again. In other words, you just slapped me. Guhan said as he touched his cheek. It was clean, white, and tender. There were no traces of being slapped, and there was no burning sensation. That's right, Guhan definitely didn't suffer a slap from Liuyan Ling. Are you sure you slapped me? Guhan stared at Liuyan Ling inexplicably and asked. It was also at this time. Pa. A loud slap sounded. Guhan's face instantly felt a burning pain, and at the same time, it began to swell slightly. It could be seen that the strength of this slap was definitely not light. If it was slapped on an ordinary person's face, it was estimated that the other person's face would directly become a steamed bun. No. Although his face was slapped, Guhan's attention was not on his face at all. Instead, he was constantly looking at Liuyan Ling's hand. When he was slapped just now, it just so happened that Guhan's whole body was staring at Liuyan Ling. Every movement of Liuyan Ling couldn't escape Guhan's eyes. Guhan could swear to God that Liuyan Ling's arm absolutely did not move even a bit. This slap naturally couldn't be from Liuyan Ling. My question, how many times did you slap me? Guhan suddenly asked in a very annoying manner. One slap. Why, do you want a few more slaps? Liuyan Ling was also inexplicable. She had an expression of completely not understanding what Guhan was saying. That's right, I really only suffered one slap. Guhan touched his cheek and said to himself, but the time is not right. The slap on my face was 5 seconds ago. But the slap that Ling gave me was 15 seconds ago. Why is it like this? Could it be that the time has been messed up? Did Ling just exchange her existence in the timeline? Thinking of this, Guhan's face suddenly changed. He immediately reached out to grab the Jiyu Xuanwu and Liuyan Ling and said anxiously, hurry up and leave this place. The space and timeline here are all messed up. I'm afraid something bad will happen. Guhan pulled the two of them and did not run any distance. The Jiyu Xuanwu in Guhan's hand suddenly disappeared and appeared at the position where she was previously standing. After another second, the Jiyu Xuanwu suddenly appeared in front of the direction Guhan was running in. Throughout the whole process, Guhan could clearly see that his hand was still holding the Jiyu Xuanwu's hand. His own wrist was bare as if he was born with a disability. It's time. The time is really messed up. At this time, Liuyan Ling finally reacted. She realized that there was a huge problem with the time and space of this place. Guhan, Ashima, let's get out of here quickly. Liuyan Ling knew the seriousness of the matter. She pulled the dazed Ashima along and the four of them escaped from the door that Liuyan Ling had kicked open. The moment they escaped from the door, Guhan felt the pressure on his heart disappear. At the same time, the mirror-like effect caused by the distortion of the surrounding space also disappeared. This made Guhan heave a sigh of relief. This meant that he was out of the range of the distortion of time and space. Why would such a terrifying distortion of time and space suddenly appear here? Guhan, who was out of danger, began to think. Prophet Sword, tell me, is this man-made power? Someone is interfering with the stability of the timeline. Ashima, who had been in a daze, suddenly came to her senses and said with certainty. Ashima did indeed have the ability to speak with certainty, because the ancient swords-grade sword maidens in her hands, the treasured sword maidens of the future 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 sword maidens sword my don't forget that Ashima once summoned Guhan from a month in the future to fight with Guhan himself. She defeated the Heaven Reliance and almost caused Guhan to fail miserably. These three sword maidens were all extremely skilled in the Tao of Time. If they said that someone was interfering with the changes of the timeline, then someone was definitely interfering with the timeline. However, there was a new problem. To create such a strong distortion of time and space, it required a very powerful force. At the very least, it had to be a universe-level Yuan coup. However, Gilgamesh was clearly defeated, and Khonsu's sword soul had dissipated. Logically speaking, there should be no power here that could cause the distortion of time and space. But why? Why was this place in disorder? Chapter 924. Moreover, just having power isn't enough. You also need to have a deep understanding of the timeline. Ashima added, the prophet told me that this person isn't just messing with the timeline. She is trying to reverse the timeline. Reverse the timeline? What does that mean? Although Guhan asked, Guhan could vaguely guess what Ashima meant. This person is trying to reverse the timeline, Ashima said in a deep voice. She is now forcibly bending the timeline. That's right, she is indeed bending the timeline. She wants to bend time into a U shape. What will happen if she succeeds? Guhan asked with a frown. I don't know. Ashima shook her head. But at least one thing is certain, and that is that she doesn't have enough power. Therefore, the bending of the timeline can only happen in this small area of the sealed land. As long as we stand outside the gate, we will be absolutely safe. We don't have to worry about the space-time inside the gate affecting us. Is that so? Guhan touched his chin, but who is twisting the timeline? Could it be that there's a U-level bandit who can control time? Control time? Jiyu Xuanwu seemed to have thought of something and immediately exclaimed, it's Auntie Kwong-san. Auntie Kwong-san actually has an extremely terrifying spiritual equipment. If her spiritual equipment is stimulated to its strongest state, it even has the power to reverse time and space. Is it Auntie Kwong-san who is controlling all of this? I think it must be her. When Guhan heard Kwong-san's name, he suddenly realized that he seemed to have neglected this Yuan coup. After Gilgamesh killed one of his doppelgangers, Kwong-san unknowingly disappeared from the sealed land. After that, no matter how fierce the battle between Guhan and Gilgamesh was, Kwong-3 never showed up. She was like a venomous snake that had always been hiding in the dark. She had hidden herself so well that Guhan had almost forgotten about this woman. It was only now that Jiyu Xuanwu had reminded him that he suddenly realized that aside from himself, Liuonian Ling, Ashima and Jiyu Xuanwu, there was still a Yuan coup hiding in the sealed grounds. But why did Aunt Kwong-san do this? Jiyu Xuanwu asked puzzledly. I can roughly guess that she might want to return to the past when her elf king was still alive. Guhan said faintly. That's right. I want to go back to the past and save my king. As soon as Guhan's voice fell, Kwong-3's voice rang out. At the same time, the image of her white wedding dress appeared in Guhan's sight. She once again wore the wedding dress that once belonged to her. She had a happy smile on her face, looking like a bride on her wedding day. Carving Emperor. 12 bullets. Time reversal. Bloom. The gate of time of eternity and truth. As Kwong-3's voice fell, a huge clock hand appeared behind her. However, the clock, which should have been moving forward slowly, began to move in full view of everyone. At first, the second hand was still moving backwards 1 second at a time, but the speed was getting faster and faster. In the end, it was like the wheels of a sports car that was crazily spinning backwards. At the same time, the hour hand of the clock began to turn clockwise, but it was spinning faster and faster like the second hand. Finally, it gradually became a phantom, and behind this phantom, a circle of visible doors was slowly appearing. It finally appeared. My gate of eternity and truth. Kwong 3 stared blankly at the door that was gradually opening in her spirit equipment. Shadao, wait for me, I'm coming to save you right now. I never thought that there would be such an infatuated person in Yuan Ku. Seeing Kwong 3's soul-shattering expression, Liuyan Ling began to deeply sympathize with her. She suddenly began to put herself in Kwong 3's shoes, wondering if she could be like Kwong 3, willing to travel through time and space to save someone. There should be such a person. Liuyan Ling secretly glanced at Guhan, but unfortunately, Guhan's attention was not on Liuyan Ling. Instead, he was frowning as he looked at the increasingly distorted space in front of him. Xuanwu, what will happen if this door is completely opened? Will it cause irreversible damage to the Guanghui amusement park? Guhan asked with some concern. I don't know about this. My mother didn't explain it to me at the beginning. Speaking of this, Jiyu Xuanwu seemed to suddenly remember something and shouted at Kwong 3, who was inside the door. Auntie Kwong 3, stop. My mother said that your strength is not enough to open the gate of eternity and truth. If you forcibly open this door, you will be swallowed by this door. Auntie Kwong 3, please stop. Your mother knows this. Do you think I don't? To tell you the truth, I was the one who told your mother about this. Kwong 3 looked at the gradually opening door in a daze. But don't worry, Auntie Kwong 3 has already sacrificed Gilgamesh's heroic soul to the gate of eternity and truth. Although Gilgamesh is a beast, he is indeed very powerful. Even if he only has the power of a heroic soul, it is enough for my gate of eternity and truth to eat. Ha 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 ha. It's been 300 years. My plan has finally come true. Not only did I kill that beast, Gilgamesh, but I also found a way to save Shadao. Shadao, wait for me. I will save you soon. I will save you soon. Kwong 3 lay on his spirit equipment and looked eagerly at the gate of eternity and truth that was still gradually expanding. Bigger. A little bigger. A little bigger. As long as I can swallow the entire spirit equipment, I will be able to save you. Kwong 3 looked eagerly at the door in front of him and said eagerly like an infatuated girl. So I was used by her from the beginning to the end. Hearing Kwong 3 talk to himself, Guhan smiled bitterly and shook his head. However, he did not blame Kwong 3 because Kwong 3 did not completely lie to him. Gilgamesh was indeed about to be born. If it was not for the information that Kwong 3 revealed, Gilgamesh would have already begun to wreak havoc in the entire Radiance amusement park. When he appeared in Shanghai Pass, the entire Ju Tian Star battle formation would not be able to withstand his power and would directly collapse. Moreover, seeing Kwong 3's infatuated expression because of love, Guhan could not bear to blame her anymore. He could only silently shake his head and say to Liuyan Ling and the others, let's go. Whether she lives or dies, let her be. I hope she can successfully return to the past. Okay. Fleeting Time Lin and Ashma nodded. Although Jiyu Xuanwu was reluctant, he still held on to Jiyu Han's hand. Just as the four of them were about to leave this place, a voice suddenly rang out in Guhan's Zifu. Save us. Save us. Who is calling for help? Guhan suddenly turned his head and looked around blankly, looking everywhere for the voice that called for help. No one is calling for help. I didn't hear anyone calling for help. Liuyan Ling saw that Guhan's expression was also blank. She pushed Ashima. Did you hear someone calling for help? No. Absolutely not. Ashima spread out both of her hands. I also didn't hear anyone calling for help. Jiyu Xuanwu immediately expressed that he did not hear anything. That's strange. I did hear someone calling for help, and it was two voices. Guhan stood in the same place, hesitating. At this time, the voice of Save Us suddenly sounded in Guhan's Zifu again. This time, Guhan heard it very clearly, to the point that he could even identify the source of the voice. Over there. Guhan stared sharply at the sealed place, as if the voice came from that increasingly distorted place. That's impossible. Other than Kwong-san, how could there be anyone else in there? Liuyan Ling said in disbelief. It's true that there's no one there, but it doesn't mean that there's nothing else there. Gu Han's eyes gradually looked up, looking towards the north and south of the sealed place. And at the end of these two directions, there were two long swords, one black and one white, stuck in the ceiling. It's the Sword Maiden. The Sword Maiden of the Tai Chi Yin-Yang sword is calling for help. They're begging me to save them. Gu Han's words shocked Liuyan Ling. What did you say? The Tai Chi Yin-Yang sword that disappeared for more than 800 years is here? And they're asking you for help. Liuyan Ling was so surprised that her jaw almost dropped. There's no mistake, this sound came from my Zifu, and not from my ears. Ji Yu Han nodded with certainty. It can only be the Sword Maiden. Only the Sword Maiden can speak through the human's purple palace. It must be the two of them asking me for help. Black Tortoise, let me ask you. If the door of truth and eternity is really opened, then what will happen to the sealed place? Gu Han asked Ji Yu. Black Tortoise. I really don't know. Mom never told me. Ji Yu. Black Tortoise's face turned red. Don't make things difficult for her. I'll answer this question for you. Without waiting for Ji Yu. Black Tortoise to answer, Ashima took the initiative to explain, this space will be completely destroyed. Recklessly distorting the timeline is something that goes against the laws of the world. Any place that is affected by the distortion of time will become a remnant of time under the distortion of time, floating in the river of time. So the entire sealed place will probably be lost in the river of time forever. There's only a 1 in a million chance that it will appear in some unknown spacetime, which is almost impossible, so the Tai Chi Yin-Yang sword will probably be lost forever along with the sealed place. No wonder the Tai Chi Yin-Yang sword would ask me for help at this time. Gu Han turned his body and looked firmly at the sealed place, then said to Liuyan Ling and the others, wait for me here, I'll be back soon. Chapter 925. With that, Gu Han flew back into the distorted sealed land without looking back. Dad, what are you going to do? Ji Yu. Black Tortoise turned his head and wanted to grab the corner of Gu Han's clothes, but unexpectedly, he was stopped by Liuyan Ling. Don't stop your brother is going to do something very important. Liuyan Ling comforted. What important thing? It's not like you don't know how dangerous this sealed space is. What if Dad gets lost in there? Ji Yu. Black Tortoise retorted agitatedly. Don't worry, with your brother's ability, it's a simple matter to retrieve the two sword ladies before he gets completely lost in this distorted space. Liuyan Ling's face was calm. You have to believe in your brother's ability. This small matter is not difficult for him. Me. You don't care about my father at all, so of course you would say something like that. Ji Yu. Black Tortoise bluntly criticized. At the same time he continued to struggle. Let go of me, quickly let go of me. He's your brother, not your dad. Liuyan Ling was about to go crazy from Ji Yu. Black Tortoise's repeated dad. I understand your brother better than you. Once your brother has decided on something, he will absolutely not give up. Right now, he wants to save the two sword ladies. You'd better obediently stand here and wait for him. Don't give him trouble, become his burden. Do you understand? What do you know? How can you understand my dad better than me? Ji Yu. Black Tortoise said as he took the hand that Liuyan Ling was grabbing onto his wrist and bit down hard. But in reality, everyone had their own judgment as to who was more knowledgeable about freezing the cold. Even if Ji Yu. Black Tortoise had a sharp mouth, biting his hand was indeed very painful. But Liuyan Ling did not say a word, only allowing Ji Yu. Black Tortoise to wantonly bite the back of her hand. Damn Gu Han, your sister's debt is all on your head. Sooner or later you will pay it back. Liuyan Ling thought hatefully in her heart. As soon as Gu Han flew back to the sealed area, he felt the heavy weight pressing down on his heart once again. Moreover, it was much heavier than when he came out. Gu Han found it difficult to even breathe. He had to save the Taiji Yang sword first because the white Taiji Yang sword was the closest to Gu Han. Naturally, he had to save the sword first. Although his heart was incomparably heavy, and if he wanted to jump up to the ceiling, he would need to use dozens of times more strength than usual. However, this was not a difficult thing for Gu Han, so Guhan easily held the white Taiji Yang sword in his hand. Thank you. The moment the Taiji Yang sword entered his hand, Guhan seemed to faintly hear the Taiji Yang sword's voice of gratitude coming from his Zifu. As the Taiji Yang sword and the Taiji Yin sword were located at the two most extreme positions in the northern part of the sealed space, Guhan had to spend even more time and energy to save the Taiji Yin sword after saving the Taiji Yang sword. As time passed, the amount of energy Guhan needed to move through the twisted sealed area increased. Compared to when he had just entered the door, the amount of energy he needed to spend was 10 times more. Next, Guhan discovered that with every passing second, the suppression on his strength in the twisted space doubled. When Guhan used what little energy he had left to reach the black Taiji Yin sword, Guhan felt that he did not even have the strength to jump. Heavenly sword. Helpless, Guhan could only change the sword Maiden from the Chijian sword to the heavenly sword. Then, he took out the wine gourd from the heavenly sword and drank a mouthful of the most delicious green plum wine. In an instant, a vigorous power filled Guhan's body. At the same time, Ji Yuhan took on the appearance of a shining golden general. A claw-shaped yellow lightning sprouted from the ground and carried Ji Yuhan up into the air, allowing Ji Yuhan to collect the black Taiji Yin sword that was stuck in the ceiling into his pouch. In this way, the two Taiji Yin Yang swords were both in Ji Yuhan's hands. While riding on the flying claw yellow lightning, Ji Yuhan could also quickly escape from the seal that was about to reach its limit. Everything seemed to be going quite well. See, I told you to believe in your brother. This little difficulty is not a problem for him, said Liuyan Ling to Jiyu Xuanwu, who had been watching everything from the outside. Probably because she saw that Guhan was fine, Liuyan Ling's grip on Jiyu Xuanwu's wrist loosened a little. Jiyu Xuanwu also focused all his attention on Guhan. His teeth that were tightly biting on Liuyan Ling's hand loosened. At the same time, the sprinting clawed yellow lightning was approaching the entrance of the sealed area. Seeing that Guhan was about to complete his task and leave the twisted land with the Taiji Yin Yang swords, suddenly, Guhan's eyes glanced at the middle of the ceiling. There was a broken fluorescent lamp in that position. At the position of the fluorescent lamp's light source, there was a white dwarf fragment that Guhan had been wearing for a long time. Through the distorted space and time, the white dwarf fragment shone brightly. That's right, I should also retrieve the white dwarf fragment. Maybe it has something to do with Yi Qing. When Guhan saw the white dwarf fragment, he could not help but think of the white dwarf fragment that he once had that had fused with the starting point. Therefore, a strong desire surged in Guhan's heart. He wanted to control the white dwarf fragment in his hands. Clawed yellow lightning still has 7 seconds. This is enough time for me to get the white dwarf fragment, Guhan thought to himself. He immediately turned his horse around and rode clawed yellow lightning towards the location of the white dwarf fragment. You stopped. Why did you stop? At that moment, no one seemed to notice Shizaki Kuzo, who was lying on his spiritual equipment. Everyone's attention was on Guhan. Therefore, these people naturally did not notice that the gate of eternity and truth, which had been expanding continuously, had gradually stopped expanding. It had condensed into a fixed diameter and was motionless. There was still at least a third of the area left before it could devour the entire spiritual equipment. Move. Hurry up and move. Kuzo 3 touched the gate of eternity and truth that had stopped expanding. Although her voice was very calm, the madness in her calmness could be easily felt by a 7-starred ladybug. What happened next made Kuzo 3 even angrier. After a few seconds of stagnation, the gate of eternity and truth finally moved again. However, this time, it did not move to expand again. Instead, it began to shrink slowly. It was about to return to its closed state. No. This cannot be. One could imagine the anger in Kuzo 3's heart. She began to think about how to expand the gate of eternity and truth again. Soon, she seemed to understand something. There is not enough energy. There must be not enough energy. Kuzo 3 attributed the closing of the gate of eternity and truth to the lack of energy. She believed that the energy in Gilgamesh's heroic soul was not enough to support the opening of the gate of eternity and truth to its limit. Therefore, the gate that could travel through space and time was preparing to close again. Energy. I need more energy. Kuzo 3 suddenly looked up and saw Guhan above her, who was about to grab the white dwarf fragment. Kuzo 3, who was in a state of madness, did not care who Guhan was. She aimed the rifle in her hand at the gate of eternity and truth and fired a shot. Suddenly, a silvery white light shot out from the gate of eternity and truth and shone directly on Guhan's body. At this time, Guhan's palm was only one step away from the white dwarf fragment. However, this step was like the end of the world. This was because Guhan found that his body was firmly covered by a silvery white light. This silvery white light was like a pair of powerful hands that grabbed Guhan and tried to drag him into the gate of eternity and truth so that he could become the energy for the gate of eternity and truth to continue expanding. Hold. Guhan squeezed the belly of Claw Huang Feijian, who was under his leg, and tried to order Claw Huang Feijian to break free from the binding of the silvery white light. However, after letting out a shrill cry, Huang Feijian, who had used all the strength in his body, was unable to push Ji Yuhan back even a step. Hiss. Claw Huang Feijian let out a final neigh before turning into golden light and disappearing. The effect of the green plum wine had worn off. Without Claw Huang Feijian's help, Guhan was even more unable to fight against the silvery white light. He was about to be sucked into the gate of eternity and truth. Dad. Seeing that Guhan was in danger, Jiyu Xuanwu took advantage of Liuyan Ling's unpreparedness and pushed Liuyan Ling away. He then rushed into the twisted seal and grabbed Guhan's hand, trying to pull Guhan back from the control of the silvery white light. Be careful. After a moment of confusion, Liuyan Ling also rushed in behind Jiyu Xuanwu and grabbed Guhan's arm. A few seconds later, Ashima also rushed over, and 3 people grabbed Guhan's arm at the same time. They were barely able to resist the pulling force of the silvery white light and maintain a situation where they could neither advance nor retreat. You be ****. Don't ruin my plan. Seeing this scene, Kwong 3 rushed over angrily and shot a bullet directly at the 3 hands that were grabbing Guhan's arm. She tried to use the pain to force Liuyan Ling and the others to retreat so that Guhan could become the energy of the gate of eternity and truth. However, what Kwong 3 didn't expect was that no matter how many shots she fired, the 3 hands still firmly grabbed Guhan's wrist and refused to let go. Are you all his harem? Kwong 3 showed a ferocious smile. Well, I was just afraid that one person's energy wouldn't be enough. The gate of eternity and truth has been opened to the limit, so I'll let the 3 of you become the energy of this gate together. After saying that, Kwong 3 took out her rifle, aimed at the gate of eternity and truth, and fired another shot. The silver light that bloomed from the gate of eternity and truth instantly doubled in size, making the balance that was originally maintaining instantly tilt to the side of the gate of eternity and truth. Moreover, it was an unstoppable tilt. It seemed that all 4 people were about to become the energy of the gate of eternity and truth. Let go of me. Let me go in. I understand everything. This may be my destiny. Guhan's eyes suddenly lit up, and he said to the 3 women who were grabbing his arm. Because at this moment, Guhan finally understood. The jasper ring on his finger not only reminded Guhan of Yi Qing's face, but it also reminded him of Yi Qing's face. In fact, Guhan had already figured out that there was only one explanation for all the mysteries about Yi Qing. That was, Guhan himself must have gone back to the past and had a touching love affair with Yi Qing at that time. That was why Yi Qing knew so many things about him. That was why Yi Qing left behind countless foreshadowing in Sword Maiden Online to help him. That was why he could become a famous swordsman in just a few months, just like a favored son of heaven. These must be the legacies left behind in the past, so Guhan had long suspected that he would go back to the past at some point in the future in some way. Now that moment had finally come, he did not expect that it would actually be at this time, through the gate of eternity and truth opened by Shizaki Kwong 3 to return to the past. But this was also good. Finally, it was time for Guhan to fulfill his destiny. Therefore, with a slight twist of his wrist, Guhan broke free from the restraint of Liuyan Ling and the others in a snake-like way. Then, under the powerful suction of the silver light, he flew toward the other side of the gate of eternity and truth that he could not see clearly in the past. We will meet again. I will be back, Guhan's voice said from afar. Chapter 926. BABK my ass. Do you think you're Arnold Schwarzenegger? A sword hilt suddenly appeared on Guhan's chest as he was flying towards the gate of truth and eternity. Then, Guhan, who felt that he couldn't resist the silver light of the gate of truth and eternity, directly flew out of the gate of the sealed place and landed in the hall outside the gate. Ancestor, you haven't left yet. Liuyan Ling shouted in surprise, because the person who rescued Guhan at this critical time was none other than Liuyan Ling's ancestor, Kunzu Fleeting Calendar. Ha 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 ha. Fleeting Calendar laughed twice. Today is a heaven-sent opportunity, I won't leave so easily. What heaven-sent opportunity? Kunzu's words made Guhan, who was stagnant in his meridians, feel very strange. This was clearly a fierce battle. How did it turn into a heaven-sent opportunity? Kunzu, don't ruin my plan. Kwong 3 shouted frantically at Kunzu. Is this guy crazy? How dare he yell at Kunzu? Even Gilgamesh was killed by Kunzu's sword. I'm afraid this woman won't even be able to withstand half a sword, Ashma said with a surprised expression. Obviously, she didn't understand why Kwong-san would be so bold. No, you're wrong. I'm not going to ruin your plans. On the contrary, I'm going to help you. The sword master said something that made everyone's jaw drop. What is this Kunzu talking about? He actually said that he wants to help Kwong 3? What the hell is going on? Could it be that Kunzu has taken a fancy to this Kwong 3? You want to help me? If you want to help me, then throw that man in for me. I want to use his flesh and blood to open my gate of truth and eternity. Kwong 3 pointed at Guhan and shouted frantically. That won't do, I can't give him to you. Kunzu shrugged. Without him, the world would be finished. I'm counting on him to take over my unfinished business. I can't hand him over to you. Then hand over the woman next to him. Kwong-san pointed at Liuyan Ling. No. This is even more unacceptable. Kunzu hurriedly waved his hand. She's my only bloodline. She's the only direct descendant of the Liuyan family. If I give her to you, I won't have any descendants. I can't do that. Then, this heavy woman. Kwong 3 had no choice but to change his target again. A heavy woman? Are you talking about me? Ashima shook her body in astonishment, and then her breasts rose and fell like waves. It seemed that the word heavy was quite accurate to describe her. She can't either. She doesn't have much power in her body. Even if she puts all her power into your gate of truth and eternity, it can only open a little more. It's useless for her to go in alone. Kunzu refused again, but the reason for his refusal made Ashima feel sad. Why did he change the reason to her lack of power when it came to her? They were all famed swordsmen, and if she wasn't strong enough, did it mean that Guhan and Liuyan Ling were strong enough? Even if you're Kunzu, you can't bully people like this. Are you messing with me? Kwong 3 didn't even ask about the black tortoise, because she finally realized that Kunzu was messing with her. No. Kunzu denied it again. You're wrong. I'm not messing with you. I really want to help you. Good. Then tell me how you want to help me. How are you going to completely open this gate of eternity and truth? Kwong 3 asked loudly. Actually, I don't have any special method. My method is the same as yours, which is to fill this gate with enough energy to open it to its limit. Kunzu laughed. What a joke. If that's the case, why are you stopping me from sacrificing these people? It felt like the conversation had returned to its original routine, back to Guhan's head. TSK. Is there really something wrong with your eyes? You don't want to choose the sword soul of an emperor sword level sword wielder, but you have to choose some famous sword level sword wielder who hasn't even grown up yet. Aren't you neglecting the essentials? The sword ancestor squinted his eyes and laughed. What did you say? Can you say that again? Kwong 3 instantly recovered from his state of madness and became dumbstruck. Did she hear it wrong? Could it be that the sword ancestor actually intended to sacrifice himself? Ancestor, are you crazy? Ignore this lunatic. Let's go. Liuyan Ling felt that something was wrong. She immediately wanted to grab Kunzu's arm. However, the moment her hand touched Kunzu's arm, she found that she grabbed thin air. This was not the real Fleeting Calendar, but the fleeting calendar's sword soul. Do you understand now? My great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great P.S. How many great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter? I'm just a sword soul. Even if I leave now, this body of mine will disappear from this world sooner or later, and it won't bring any benefits to this world. The sword master rubbed his face against fleeting times when he did not have a physical body. After all, I'm just a sword soul. Even if I leave now, this body will disappear from this world sooner or later. On the contrary, if I transform into energy and enter the door of truth and eternity, then I will have done immeasurable good deeds. At the very least, I can make a little contribution to this world, to this world's past, and to this world's future. Don't you think that's great? After saying this, Kunzu's body took the initiative to enter the gate of eternity and truth. The moment Kunzu's sword soul entered the gate of eternity and truth, the entire gate of eternity and truth expanded more than 10 times in an instant. Not only did it swallow the original carving Emperor's roulette, but the entire sealed land was also enveloped by this huge gate of eternity and truth. It looked almost the same size as the entire Tianmenmen gate. Is this Kunzu's strength? Guhan said in a daze. Kunzu's sword soul and Gilgamesh's heroic soul should be on the same level. They were both just spiritual bodies of the original body, and they only had less than a tenth of the original body's strength. However, Gilgamesh's heroic soul could only open a gate the size of a person, but Kunzu's sword soul could expand this gate to the size of the entire Tianmenmen gate. One could imagine how powerful Kunzu was. My little friend Guhan, I've let you down today. Even if you want to destroy the entire Lionian family, the Lionian family will not resist. We'll do as you wish. When the gate of eternity and truth expanded to its largest size, Kunzu's sword soul's last words suddenly sounded out from the gate. What does that mean? Kunzu's words confused Guhan. Although the Lionian family had cheated him since he became a swordsman, the Lionian family had helped him more often than not. If it weren't for the Lionian family, he wouldn't have his current achievements, much less the Chijian sword. Furthermore, the Lionian family had saved Guhan from Gilgamesh. If it weren't for the Lionian family and Lionian Ling, Guhan would already be a hard corpse. So, to put it bluntly, it was Guhan who owed the Lionian family, not the other way around. But why did Kunzu say such a thing in the end? He actually said that he'd let me down? Even if I destroy the entire Lionian family, the Lionian family will not resist and will do as I wish. What is he talking about? Is Guhan retarded? Why would Guhan want to destroy the Lionian family for no reason? Just as Jiyu Han was pondering this question, a shocking change occurred in an instant. From the depths of the door of truth and eternity, a long sword suddenly flew out. This long sword directly appeared in front of Jiyu Xuanwu. Then, the blade of the sword turned into a stream of water that wrapped around Jiyu Xuanwu's waist. Then, it shrunk and disappeared into the door of truth and eternity with Jiyu Xuanwu. The entire process was simply too fast, so fast that the entire process was close to the speed of light. Jiyu Han didn't even have a single thought. Jiyu Xuanwu didn't even have time to change his expression before he was swept into the door of truth and eternity by the sword. What happened? Jiyu Xuanwu? Jiyu Xuanwu? Guhan's left hand was slightly bent, and his palm kept groping downwards as if he was trying to feel something. Just a second ago, this hand was still holding the Jiyu Xuanwu in his embrace. But after 0.00001 seconds, this person was gone. Guhan could still feel the outline of Jiyu Xuanwu's body, as well as her gradually disappearing body temperature. Not good. Someone has gone in. The gate is about to close. Just like Guhan, Kwong 3 was also dumbfounded. This was because the gate of eternity and truth was closing at the same speed as when it was opened. This meant that someone had gone back to the past through the gate of eternity and truth. The energy of the gate of eternity and truth was almost depleted, and was about to close. No. Kwong 3 let out a scream. Then, ignoring the danger of entering the closing gate, she directly entered the gate. Kwong 3's body finally passed through the gate at the last moment before it closed. As for whether she could successfully pass through, only the heavens knew. The sealed land that was covered by the gate of eternity and truth disappeared along with the gate. The modernized Yi Qing's house had disappeared, and in its place was a big, dark hole. The walls of the big hole were moist, as if the big hole had just been dug out. The entire sealed land had been taken away by the gate of eternity and truth. Clang! Guhan's body fell heavily on the ground. His pupils bulged, and his breathing stopped. It was as if he was dead. Guhan! Guhan, what happened to you? Liuyan Ling hurriedly hugged Guhan in her arms. Her whole body was covered in tears at this moment. Chapter 927. Sister, sister. This pervert has finally woken up. Sister, sister. If this pervert really wakes up, will he do something terrible to us? When Guhan opened his eyes, he saw Om and Diam hugging each other in fear, as if Guhan would eat them. Guhan raised his head and looked around. He found that he had returned to his room in the castle of Maple Kingdom. The layout of the room was exactly the same as when he left. It seemed that no one had deliberately renovated it. Jiyu Xuanwu, that is, your young lady, how is she? Is she back? Guhan asked with the last bit of hope. Guhan hoped that Om and Diam could tell him that Jiyu Xuanwu had returned. Everything he had seen before he fainted was just an illusion. Jiyu Xuanwu had not been pulled into the gate of eternity and truth. Sister, sister, why is he asking us this question? Shouldn't we be asking him this question? Sister, sister, this is indeed the question we should ask him. Where is our young lady? Why didn't we see the young lady coming back with him? All right. It seems that I am not hallucinating. Everything is real. The conversation between Om and Diam completely shattered Guhan's fantasy. Guhan finally began to face the fact that Jiyu Xuanwu had been pulled into the reality of the gate of eternity and truth. Who sent me back? Guhan sorted out his thoughts and asked Om and Diam, sister, sister. It was a woman who had never seen him before who sent him back. How did he have so many women? Sister, sister, we must have less contact with this man in the future. Maybe he is planning to include us in the harem. Jiyu Han was too lazy to complain about Om and the sisters' sharp retorts. Ashima and the other two had already seen her. Obviously, the woman that the maid sisters had not seen before was naturally Fleeting Ling. It was Fleeting Ling who had sent him back. Where is she now? Guhan was silent for a long time before he finally asked the two sisters. She's squatting outside the door. The electrician finally stopped talking to his sister and began to speak human language. Well, she seems to have said that she doesn't have the face to see you, but she's afraid that will hurt you, so she's been guarding the door. She's been squatting for a whole day. Om added. Please invite her in. I have something to say to her. After Guhan finished speaking, Om and the electric sisters couldn't wait to run out, then opened the door and said a few words to the people outside. Guhan heard a stuttering footstep slowly approaching him, and finally sat on his bed. Throughout the entire process, there was no other sound other than the sound of footsteps. Even the sound of breathing was deliberately suppressed by the other party. It felt like a child who had done something wrong and was called to the teacher's office. Sorry. After a period of silence, Liuyan Ling finally broke the silence and bravely opened her mouth to apologize to Guhan. Why are you saying sorry to me? Guhan's voice remained calm, as if there was no anger in it. It was my ancestor who took your sister away, Liuyan Ling admitted honestly. How do you know that it was Lord Kunzu who took Black Tortoise away? Guhan turned his body and looked at Liuyan Ling who was sitting beside him. How do you know that it was Kunzu who did it? Why don't you say that it was Kuzo Shizaki who did it? The two of us clearly didn't even see what took Jiyu Black Tortoise away. How can you be sure that it was your ancestor? This can be hidden from others, but it can't be hidden from me, Liuyan Ling said in a low voice. It was a sword that took your sister away. I am very familiar with the sword's aura. It can even be said that I grew up under the influence of that sword. Although it was only for a moment, I can 100% guarantee that it was the Firmament Emperor sword that took your sister away. There is no mistake about this. It was my ancestor who did it. Firmament Emperor sword. Hearing this name, Guhan could not help but look up to the sky and sigh. This name was too familiar to Guhan. In fact, it could be said that there was no human in the world who was not familiar with this name. This was because this was the first Emperor Sword level sword mistress that a human had ever owned. It was also the Emperor Sword level sword mistress that Kunzu had owned. During the battle of the founding Emperor Mausoleum, Kunzu, who was only an immortal sword level sword mistress, was naturally outnumbered when faced with the surprise attack of two flood level Yuan Ku. He was about to die at the hands of these two shameless flood level Yuan Ku. However, the founding Emperor Mausoleum suddenly exploded. A giant dragon rose from the mausoleum and finally turned into a sword with golden edges. The blade was tightened in the middle, and the hilt was like a giant dragon with its mouth open. One side of the blade was engraved with the word firmament and the other side was engraved with the word Emperor Sword. This was the first Emperor Sword level sword mistress that a human had ever owned, the Firmament Emperor Sword. This Firmament Emperor Sword directly swept Kunzu into the founding Emperor Mausoleum. The two flood level Yuan Ku could not break through the external defense of the founding Emperor Mausoleum no matter how much effort they put in. After they attacked for 49 days, just as the two flood level Yuan Ku were about to give up on killing Kunzu and eliminate the precarious survivors, the sword ancestor, who had completely synchronized with the Emperor Sword of Tsangtian and completed the Jojo competition in the first Emperor Mausoleum, finally ascended to the throne, came out of the first Emperor Mausoleum. It only took him less than an hour to kill the two flood-level bandits under the Emperor Sword of Tsangtian. In the years that followed, Kunzu used the Firmament Emperor Sword to kill more than 30 flood-level and desolation-level Yuan Ku. He killed until the entire world turned around. Previously, it was those damn Yuan Ku who chased and killed humans everywhere. But now, it was Kunzu who led the swordbearers to chase and kill Yuan Ku everywhere. Those Yuan Ku could only desperately hide or simply move their lair into the dimensional rift to resist Kunzu's massacre. Anyway, those decades were probably the happiest decades for humans. Humans even had the thought of reclaiming the entire world and ending the Age of Destruction. Unfortunately, as Kunzu was pulled into the dimensional rift by the creation divinity, humans lost a powerful leader. They had no choice but to retreat to a few base cities and start a long tug-of-war with Yuan Ku that lasted for 1,000 years. Therefore, the Firmament Emperor Sword had an extremely powerful symbolic meaning for humans. Although the Firmament Emperor Sword's ranking had slipped from the first Emperor Sword level to the 9th with the continuous birth of sword mistresses, it was undeniable that in the hearts of humans, the Firmament Emperor Sword was still an unparalleled Emperor Sword that represented the salvation of the entire human race. More importantly, the Firmament Emperor Sword was known as the model of all Emperor Sword level sword mistresses. No, it was the model of all sword mistresses. This was because in the past 1,000 years, the Emperor Sword of Firmament had been asleep for no more than 3 months. Every time the wielder of the Emperor Sword of Firmament ascended, the Sword Committee would immediately gather all the wielder of the Immortal Sword rank together and hold the ceremony of Firmament. The so-called Firmament ceremony was for them to try to synchronize with the Firmament Emperor Sword. If they could synchronize successfully, they would be qualified as a crown prince. When all the Immortal Sword level sword mistresses had completed their synchronized experiments, these Immortal Sword level sword mistresses with the qualifications to be crown prince would immediately begin the 9 states competition. Once someone defeated the other opponents in the 9 states competition, the new Gendi would ascend to the throne under the gaze of all humans and become the new generation of Emperor Sword level sword mistresses. The 1,000 years of history had proven that every firmament ceremony would have more than 3 Immortal Sword level sword mistresses synchronized with the Firmament Emperor Sword and successfully obtained the qualifications to be crown prince. The 9 states competition of the Firmament Emperor Sword level was extremely difficult. At the very least, it was much easier than the 9 states competition of the other Emperor Sword level sword mistresses. Every time the 9 states competition of the Firmament Emperor Sword level sword mistresses successfully defeated all the opponents to ascend to the throne and become the strongest thigh of humanity, the Emperor Sword level sword mistresses. Other than the Firmament Emperor Sword, the other Emperor Sword level sword mistresses were not so easy to serve. These Emperor Sword level sword mistresses were usually in a deep sleep for hundreds of years. They were not even qualified to hold the ceremony to select the Crown Prince. Even if the ceremony was held and the Crown Prince was born, the 9 states competition of the Firmament Emperor Sword level was usually terrifyingly difficult. 90% of the Crown Princes would fail in the cruel 9 states competition of the Firmament Emperor Sword level and become dejected losers. If you don't understand what I've said above, you only need to remember the following sentence. In these 1,000 years, humanity has always had an Emperor Sword level sword mistress protecting everyone. This Emperor Sword level sword mistress is the cutest Firmament Emperor Sword mistress. P.S. The settings related to Emperor Swords have finally been completed. The true face of the Emperor Sword level sword mistress will also be revealed to everyone. The Emperor Sword level sword mistress system is very different from the normal sword mistress system. The relationship between the Liu Nian family and the Firmament Emperor Sword was not limited to Kanzu alone. All the Emperor Sword level sword mistresses in the Liu Nian family also had Firmament Emperor Sword level sword mistresses. It was as if they could not coordinate with the other Emperor Sword level sword mistresses. Moreover, the Firmament Emperor Sword and the Liu Nian family were very close. When the Firmament Emperor Sword level sword mistress had nothing to do, she loved to go to the Liu Nian mountain and stay there for a while. She would chat with the descendants of the Liu Nian family and gossip about Kanzu in the past. When Liunian Ling was born, the Firmament Emperor Sword mistress was very fond of this young lady from the Liu Nian family. Liunian Ling even remembered lying in the arms of the Firmament Emperor Sword mistress when she was young. It could be said that she had fallen asleep because of the Firmament Emperor Sword mistress scent. That was why Liunian Ling could tell Guhan with certainty that she had used the Firmament Emperor Sword mistress scent to determine that it was the Firmament Emperor Sword that had swept the black tortoise away. Even if Kanzu's sword spirit used the Firmament Emperor Sword mistress, even if Kanzu had become a sword spirit, he could still use his own sword mistress scent to create an illusory but real sword mistress. Chapter 928. So why do you think your ancestor took the black tortoise and brought her back? What if I bring her back to the past? Ji Yuhan asked as he looked at Fleeting Time's hand that was tugging at the corner of his shirt. I don't know. Liunian Ling was probably telling the truth. He had never seen Liunian Ling so ashamed before. Is that so? Guhan didn't ask anything else and just looked at Liunian Ling quietly. Will you really hate our Liunian clan from now on? Will you become enemies with our Liunian clan? Liunian Ling asked Guhan with a trembling voice after a long period of silence. She was looking forward to Guhan's answer, but she was also extremely afraid of Guhan's answer. She was looking forward to Guhan's attitude, but she was also afraid of Guhan's attitude. Why should I hate your Liunian clan? Guhan asked with narrowed eyes. Because it's our ancestor. If I hadn't used our ancestor's sword soul scar, then Sister Black Tortoise wouldn't have. Liunian Ling was very clear about this and tried to take responsibility for it. If you hadn't used the sword soul scar, then wouldn't I have died at Gilgamesh's hands? Guhan pursed his lips, but in reality, Guhan wouldn't have died. He was already holding the jasper stone in his hand. If Gilgamesh still dared to attack him, he would immediately activate the jasper stone and return to Chongyang Mountain. So even if Liunian Ling hadn't appeared in time, Guhan wouldn't have died. But I could have used the 1-meter sword. Liunian Ling's attitude was terrifying. If I had used the 1-meter sword, then Elder Kanzu wouldn't have had to appear, and so many things wouldn't have happened. Forget about it. This has nothing to do with you. Guhan let out a long sigh. Don't worry. I will always remember your kindness. We are still friends. What about the Liu Nian clan? Liunian Ling seemed to sense that there was something wrong with Guhan's words. What about our Liu Nian family? Will you do as our ancestor said and destroy our Liu Nian clan? What kind of joke is that? How could a famed sword wielder like me destroy the #1 family in the world, the Liu Nian family? Guhan's lips curled up as if he was telling the funniest joke in the world. No. Others may not know, But I, Liuyan Ling, have a feeling that one day in the future, you really can. Before Liuyan Ling could finish her sentence, Guhan interrupted her. Say no more. Guhan placed his hand on Liuyan Ling's lips. You are you, the Liuyan family is the Liuyan family, and Kunzu is Kunzu. I can differentiate between the two clearly. That's great. Liuyan Ling let out a long sigh of relief. Then you won't become enemies with our Liuyan family, and there won't be, yes, I, Guhan, am not an unreasonable man. This grudge is between me and the Sword Ancestor, so I will settle this grudge with the Sword Ancestor. Ji Yuhan said matter-of-factly. Settle this with our ancestor? What do you mean? Liuyan Ling was at a loss. Kunzu had disappeared for almost 1,000 years. How could Guhan settle this with Kunzu? Could it be, Ji Yuhan, could it be that you also want to return to the past, to that era to find the old ancestor? Liuyan Ling finally reacted. It turned out that Guhan was the same as Shizaki Kuzo. He wanted to go back to the past to save Jiyu Xuanwu and settle his grudge with Kunzu. No. This is too dangerous. There are some secrets that you don't know. Since ancient times, it wasn't that no one wanted to go back to the past, and it wasn't that no one succeeded in passing through the gate of time and space. However, after they went back to the past, they never came back, and history didn't change because of them. There was no information about them in history. After they went back to the past, it was as if they had completely disappeared, never to be seen again. Listen to me, Guhan, you definitely can't go back to the past. I'd rather you kill your way into the Liuyan family and fight it out with us than go back to the unknown past. Let's talk about the past. Guhan gently caressed Liuyan Ling's hand. However, I'll have to go back to the Liuyan family sooner or later. I hope you won't block my way then. What? Didn't you say that the Liuyan family is the Liuyan family? You won't put this grudge on us? Liuyan Ling said in shock. Why did Guhan's thoughts change so quickly like a child's face? I'm not going to find trouble with your Liuyan family, but with Kunzu. Guhan paused. Kunzu left behind a total of 12 sword scar soul seals, right? And 8 of them have already been used, right? If you include the extra sword scar soul seal that was used against Gilgamesh and the one that was secretly used in Sword Maiden Online, then your Liuyan clan should have 3 sword scar soul seals in their hands. Listen up, Ling. Your Liuyan family must keep these 3 sword scar soul seals safe. I won't take advantage of Kunzu. When I, Guhan, become an immortal sword wielder, I'll personally go to the Liuyan mountain and fight it out with Kunzu's sword scar soul seal. I've said that I'll settle this debt with Kunzu. With that, Guhan put down Liuyan Ling's hand and said tiredly, you can go out. I'm tired. Let me sleep again. Oh right, you shouldn't stay here anymore. The Wu people are still watching us from the Shanhai Pass. If they discover that you're not here, they might launch another attack on the Shanhai Pass. You should return to the Sun Guard mansion as soon as possible. You're chasing me away, right? Liuyan Ling stood up dejectedly. All right, then I'll go. Have a good rest. I'll return to the Shanhai Pass now. Although Liuyan Ling got up and left, she still looked back from time to time, hoping that Guhan would stop her. Wait. She didn't expect Guhan to actually stop her. Just as Liuyan Ling was about to say something happily, she heard Guhan say, this is a secret. The Yuan Ku here will not harm humans. They're like the free people in the free city. I hope that you won't reveal the secret here. Let them live here in peace. Do you think I'm that kind of person? Liuyan Ling didn't say anything else. She could only smile bitterly and silently walk out of Guhan's room. Past. Jiyu Xuanwu. Heavenly Cumulus Sword. After Liuyan Ling left, Guhan didn't really rest. Instead, his mind was constantly filled with all kinds of information and intelligence that he had obtained in the past. Gradually, a shocking idea appeared in Guhan's mind. Guhan had heard the name Jiyu Xuanwu from the other sword ladies several times before, so he always thought that Jiyu Xuanwu was actually the ancestor of his Jiyu family. When he found out that Jiyu Xuanwu had jumped out as his daughter, Guhan was still confused and couldn't figure it out. He only roughly thought that the previous Jiyu Xuanwu was one Jiyu Xuanwu and the future Jiyu Xuanwu was another Jiyu Xuanwu. They just happened to have the same name. After all, the name Jiyu Xuanwu wasn't given by Guhan, but by Artoria or Chendo Isuzu. Therefore, it was understandable that they didn't know that Guhan's ancestor was called Jiyu Xuanwu. But from the looks of it, what if the ancestor Jiyu Xuanwu and daughter Jiyu Xuanwu were the same person? Now that Jiyu Xuanwu had entered the gate of eternity and truth, he had been taken to the distant past. No one knew how many years had passed in the past, so Jiyu Xuanwu could have appeared in any era in the past. Then, could it be possible that Jiyu Xuanwu had returned to the beginning of the apocalypse and met Heavenly Cumulus Sword, Mysterious Deep Sword, and other immortal sword ladies, and even became good friends? Therefore, the Heavenly Cumulus Sword had said Jiyu Xuanwu's name in shock after seeing Guhan. Jiyu Xuanwu and Guhan looked very similar in appearance. Combining the characteristics of Guhan and Artoria's faces, it wasn't strange that the Heavenly Cumulus Sword could recognize Guhan's origin at a glance. Then, everything could be explained clearly. His ancestor Jiyu Xuanwu was not from that era, but his biological daughter Jiyu Xuanwu who had traveled to the past yesterday. At the same time, there was another thing that made Guhan realize. The sealed land and the white dwarf fragment in the sealed land had disappeared along with the gate of eternity and truth. Although according to Ashima, these things would be completely shattered in the chaos of time and space. However, Ashima was only guessing. She had never really traveled through time and space, so it was inevitable that her guess would be wrong. If the sealed land, the white dwarf key, and Jiyu Xuanwu had traveled to the past, and the timeline of Jiyu Xuanwu's return was more than 900 years before the apocalypse, then there was no doubt that Jiyu Xuanwu had returned to an era that was decades earlier than Yi Qing's birth. Therefore, it could be explained that Yi Qing's home in Yuzhang City and the gate of that home needed the white dwarf key. These things had actually traveled to more than 900 years ago from yesterday. By the time Yi Qing was born, Jiyu Xuanwu should be in his 70s or 80s. Look, he had told Jiyu Xuanwu about various things related to Yi Qing. It was very likely that Jiyu Xuanwu had found Yi Qing when she was young, raised and taught her, and finally passed the sealed land and the white dwarf key to Yi Qing. Jiyu Xuanwu and Guhan looked so similar. As long as Jiyu Xuanwu dressed up as a man and put on makeup, he could even become a real Guhan. This was too scary. Countless beads of sweat appeared on Guhan's forehead. At this moment, he seemed to have solved all the mysteries. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.